Commissioner Smith,
Here.
Commissioner Roth. Here. Commissioner Nacita, Commissioner Mum,
Here.
and Mayor Neely.
Here. I'd like to just take a moment to have everybody else that's in the room introduce themselves, starting with Joe, if you would.
I'm Joe Hertzberg, and I will be facilitating the remainder of the goal-setting session tonight.
And then to your right, staff, and do the staff, and then the people who come in.
Jim Leffler,
Nancy Kraushar.
Terry Bankhead.
Scott Archer,
Tony Conkle.
Okay, William?
William Gifford.
Ed Wagner, Ed Fournier, John Lewis, Tom O'Brien.
Karen Moore.
Okay. Do we have anything for future agenda items? And does this include the possibility of future agenda items for the commission meeting as well? Or are we talking about strictly the work session?
It could be either, but I think we're just looking for work sessions. It may actually be driven by this exercise tonight, so
Yeah.
we're hoping it will.
It may be. There's a couple things I might have missed, but I talked about at one point having some kind of dialogue with the Beaver Creek community regarding our urban reserves that have extended beyond Enrici Road to sort of find out what their vision might be in terms of how they want to protect their community. And it was pointed out to me that another urban reserve issue that is before us that we need to perhaps deal with is developing an intergovernmental agreement with the county regarding Newell Creek Canyon. All of Newell Creek Canyon got designated as an urban reserve, and yet most of the properties that are within the areas that Metro have bought that are in private ownership are really rural properties. Many of them don't have city services and so forth, and are likely not to be developed because they're just isolated areas. And so there was discussion about having an intergovernmental agreement. It doesn't have to come up immediately in the work session, but I think it's got to be a point of some discussion. Anybody else?
Could I ask Tony, do you have any input on that? What?
Right. No. I think that the difficult part there is that most of that is owned by Metro.
Yeah.
Especially everything kind of west, south of 213.
Right.
I guess we would need to explore further what we'd be looking for in terms of an IGA there, if it's for Metro utilizing it more for trails and open space, or if the county's going to provide law enforcement, or if we're going to provide joint law enforcement, code enforcement. So I guess we'd need to kind of flesh out what we'd be looking for in terms of an agreement with them.
Yeah. It's just there are some properties that are basically, I think, in the water resource area and extend up into the steep slopes that are probably not going to be urbanized, that are not owned by Metro.
Correct. There are some yes, towards the north end of that area.
Right.
I have an item, and I don't know if this should bring it up at the work session or at the commission meeting, but we need to bring into discussion the, what's that called? The thing between the colleges, the articulation agreement between the colleges and Concordia University and Clackamas Community College.
Well, I think you're at, maybe this is the best time to explain it, because other than you sitting down with myself and Betty individually, I had never heard about it before, and maybe staff has. So you might want to take a moment to explain what this is.
Well, Concordia University, we've been dealing with them since last fall on an agreement to bring a campus to Oregon City. They'll be bringing their business department out here is what's proposed at this point. And eventually building. What we started talking about in the beginning was just doing an articulation agreement, which is students would be admitted to Concordia as freshmen, but they would do their first 2 years at Clackamas, but they would be guided through those 2 years by Concordia University, and excuse me, and then go on to finish the degree at Concordia. Now it's kind of expanded to a bigger program in bringing in some innovation labs, working with the college on some property that they have up there. And we had a meeting, 2 weeks ago? that really was very, very exciting. Clackamas is very excited about it and wanted to get more departments involved in it, so looks like it's going to be very promising. No, it's an articulation agreement, is what they call it.
Let me make,
Between the city then wouldn't be a party.
No. At this point, I think what the city's point in it would be was maybe helping finding a space for them to have some room at this point.
I'll make there's a good request to come forward in the retreat. And I know perhaps some commissioners feel that certain things have happened where other commissioners have made explorations. When this happens, I think when you're looking at these things, I think you need to be bringing it forward at a work session. And this is my understanding, some of this, and of course you weren't on the commission at the time, but some of this involved a couple of the commissioners having these discussions, and frankly, I didn't learn about it until earlier on when Kathy Roth came and talked to me individually and talked to Betty individually. I think when we look at these things, I don't think there's any reason to inhibit us looking at these things, but I think we all need to be alerted. This is maybe your first exposure, Sheila?
When we took the tour of Blue Heron, Kathy mentioned it.
Oh, okay.
And then a couple of days later, gave me a flyer. What would be really maybe the best way to get the information out from them is if, say, for you or people who've been working on it want to write down something. And I think that might have been on your list, but you could have been on the list.
Yeah.
Of getting something in writing to us. It's sort of a proposal on what they're going to do in the community or what they're working on, maybe how the city can help, and then we can share that with everyone, including our department.
But I think that's a great thing for our city to have. We can do that. That thing's wonderful. Any other agenda items? Well, with that, we'll go under discussion items, and are we moving you first?
That'd be wonderful.
Let's vote on it.
You are three. Which three are you?
It's the item on the communication tower.
Okay, yes, 3B. We're going to take 3B first, unless there's some objection to doing so.
So, yeah. No, we've already got the setup, Joe. So, good evening, Mayor and Commissioners. John Lewis is here with Ed Fournier of Verizon. And the City Public Works Department has been approached by Verizon to lease them some sort of a facility at our Boynton site where we already have some leases for telecommunication facilities. And I'm going to turn it over to John at this point so he can explain some of the details. And then I'm sure Ed would like to discuss as well. And the reason we're here is it's city property, and before we really go any farther with it, we want to understand if the City Commission is interested in leasing part of the Boynton site for telecommunications purposes. And we already do, but this is just another sort of growing that particular lease situation.
You covered it. Well, we do own a site which I think many of you are hopefully familiar with. It's got a large water tower sitting on it. It's in the South End area, and it's best known for that reservoir, Boynton Reservoir. So the city owns the property. Public Works manages the site. The water division oversees the site and manages the site. So its sole purpose at this up until a couple years ago was storage of water, drinking water. And a couple years ago we had, I think in 2006, we had T-Mobile approach the city about placing some antennas on the reservoir. And then another year later, Clearwire approached the city about placing some antennas on the reservoir. So we have a couple of users on that reservoir now, and we've received several calls. I think we get a call about a year. Every year we probably get a call from a different vendor. And Verizon called this year, and I guess Ed was just either a tougher negotiator or I was weak or something. I don't know. But Verizon, first of all, is a larger vendor than some of the other smaller vendors we've looked at. And when we started talking about the idea of another vendor being on Boyden Reservoir, it raised some concerns for me. For one, we have, I would say, minor issues with access, minor that could be major, I suppose. So every vendor that's there, depending on their service concerns or problems or whatever might be going on with that, they have to access that, and sometimes it's overnight because they don't want to take down their service during the day, so they want to do that work at night. There's security issues, so we're not excited about the idea of additional vendors being on that reservoir. And I guess the other thing is we generate revenue from these renters who basically place their facilities on the tower and also have some small site provisions that are on the ground. So anyway, we generate revenue from them. I wouldn't say a lot, but it's something, and we makes sense. The site is large enough, and we don't have any plans for new reservoirs on that particular site, but there is room for an additional reservoir if we needed to put an additional reservoir there, and something else like a cell tower, if you will. So when I was talking to Ed a little bit more about it, it was my point that I'm not real excited about seeing more facilities go up on that existing reservoir. I've listed several reasons. One is just the hassle of access. The other is just adding more. Right now, two sides of that reservoir have conduits that go from kind of an exterior area through a gated or fenced area and then up the reservoir. So we would have to have yet another penetration, I guess, if you would, through that area. And I've got some concerns. We know we need to, at some point in time, address seismic issues with that facility. So what that means at the foundation level, I don't really know, but that would be one more obstacle in our way there. As I said, there's the excess issue. There's some concern. I mean, obviously this is a superstructure, if you will, but adding all these additional components to that, those questions haven't really been answered as to whether or not that's a problem or not, but we would have to have those answered. And then just having all this kind of electronics on a steel structure like that, is there some kind of concern about cathodic protection of the reservoir, which is kind of, speeding the aging process of steel. So that's a concern as well that I haven't, we haven't pursued that. We didn't pursue it with the first two vendors, but as we get, more interest in adding equipment to that tower, I started thinking about those kind of things. So if what I'm hearing from Verizon is if we did do a tower, it'd have to be taller than the reservoir so that they could see or have line of sight over that reservoir as opposed to through the reservoir. That won't work very well. So the height is significant. I guess the other thing is I feel like if we were to put a tower on that site, it'd be nice if it accommodate other users, so there'd be more rent potential. And in order to do that, there's have to be provisions for even a taller tower. And so there's some pictures in here that show existing conditions. There's some pictures in here that Verizon put together about kind of worst case scenarios if we were to go with just them, what it would look like if we were to go with full-blown tower and users. You never know what the different vendors are going to need for antennas and what they kind of look like. But I think what you showed was kind of a full-scale build-out worst-case scenario of what that tower would look like. And again, our feeling is we've already got a water tower there. It's tall. It's an obvious icon, if you will. This would be a way of grouping all those, or grouping at least a couple of these tall public facilities, if you will, in one spot on one site that's already city-owned. I suppose you can talk more to other sites that you might have looked at in the past, but to me it makes sense to kind of group those. That particular site is kind of well covered, if you will, with trees, and the surrounding area is conducive, I guess, more conducive than a lot of other sites that I've seen around town that might be of interest to a cell phone provider for a tower.
Can I just add one thing there? And don't get the impression that we're naive and don't fully understand the fact that placing cell towers anywhere is controversial. I don't think anybody really thinks they're a gorgeous addition to their neighborhoods. I mean, we're not being naive about this at all. We know there's some controversy involved, and we also know, though, that it would benefit a lot of citizens in Oregon City to have better. I think, actually, Ed, I'd want you to speak to that. You know much more about your service and your coverage areas, but so I just wanted to note that. Sorry. Go ahead.
So there's also, because of the height issue, I understand there's public hearings and there's a land use process that we would need to go through. And then really there's there's a decision on that process. So there's a land use decision that will come before the city commission that they'd have to make a decision on. Plus you're the property owner. So you'd have to make the final decision on the lease. And before we jump into any of that, it really just seemed like the appropriate thing to do was to get some buy-in from the city commission that this is a direction that you'd like staff to pursue. Because if we don't have that, then we're kind of barking up the wrong tree at this point. So, go ahead.
I'd like to make 2 points regarding having cell phone facilities, especially on city-owned land. I agree the revenue is an opportunity. I'd like to see the projections on what the revenue would be. But I think a lot of what I've thought about cell towers in the past have to do with both health issues, which I don't have the slightest knowledge about, but I think that would come up among public concerns. But there's another issue of aesthetic concerns that I think is addressable, because I've seen on the internet pictures of cell phone towers that are actually done through some design to look, not just like some very utilitarian, monstrosity, but actually have some design in them. If that would be possible, I think the community would be more receptive to it. And the other thing is, and I have no idea if this has ever been done before, any place you have a cell tower, it's typically very high. You see it on the highway, off in the distance on the horizon, cell phone towers on the tops of mountains as you drive down I-5, for example. Those are probably quite windy also. So I don't know if it's possible, but I would wonder if it's possible to kind of double the utility of a cell phone tower by using the tower for some type of wind power generation as well. And that's what I would hope we could explore.
So let me make sure I got all those. Revenue projections is something that you'd be interested in knowing more about. I didn't produce it, but I do have information on the rent that we collect now from the 2 vendors that are on the so I could share that tonight. Aesthetic, I've seen some of those facilities as well. Usually they're a little smaller. So, for instance, a palm tree, if you will, probably not in Oregon, but I've seen those kind of situations. I've seen things that look more tree-like, aside from palm trees. At the height we're talking about, 135 to 155. I'm not exactly sure how that would play out, but I heard that one. Mm-hmm. The other one was a health question, which is, I think you were getting towards, is having a cell tower in close vicinity to your home a health concern?
Yeah, most land use conflicts and challenges that I've heard historically to cell phone towers have to do with radiation concerns, et cetera. I have no expertise or knowledge on any of that. So
okay.
I'm just saying that if that were done, that would be a neighborhood concern that I would probably anticipate being expressed.
And then the last one was, is there an option for not only using it as a cell tower, but to generate power? Mm-hmm. Okay. So those seem like kinds of questions that might have come up maybe once or twice. So I don't know if you're prepared to speak to those tonight, but those seem like good things to be able to talk about, for sure.
A couple more.
Okay?
My questions were, it looks like from your photographs that each carrier is a 10-foot increase in height.
Actually, if I could, maybe I could give 180 seconds of generic presentation, if I may, maybe a couple clarifications. I'm sure there'll be a myriad of questions.
Can I ask the rest of it here?
Oh, sure.
How many carriers would fit onto that base? That's another part of my question. And then I just clarified my other one on the, each additional carrier is $10,000 a year, right? That's what's...
So there was a lease agreement in there, and I, when I put that together, I cut and pasted from some of our other vendors, so the dollar amounts don't apply.
Okay. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Ed Fournier, Land Services Northwest. I'm a consultant for Verizon Wireless. I worked with them for 11, 12 years or something like that. And my role, and I think I'm uniquely qualified to speak to probably a little bit of the myriad of everything. I'm not an engineer by training. My function is really the real estate, but I also do all the permitting as well for the site. So I think I can address the aesthetic concerns, the leasing concerns, the operational concerns, and the permitting concerns as well, because if we move through this process, I will be the person negotiating the lease, and I will also be the person standing before the Planning Commission at the CUP process, and hopefully not in front of you all at an appeal process. To clarify on that, our initial approach with the city and Jan was to co-locate on the existing tank. There's nothing magical about the tank. It's just a tall thing that'll hold antennas in the air. That's all a telecommunication tower does. If you had an 8-story building there, we'd talk to you about putting antennas on the roof. So again, there's nothing magical about the tank. It's just something to hold antennas up. That's the reason the two existing telecommunication providers are there. It's an area where there aren't tall structures. There's not a tall hill. There's not other telecommunication sites. It's a natural place to examine for co-location. Again, John expressed concerns, mentioned that other folks have called, they're expressed those concerns, and they move on. I then came back with an alternative, possibly building a telecommunications tower actually adjacent to the water tank itself. We had a site walk meeting back in June where we came up with a conceptual design. I assume that's in your packet. I've not actually seen everything that's in there, so you might have a little bit more information than I'm aware of. That showed a potential location for the equipment and for the telecommunications tower. Exactly, yes, that's it. Based upon the site walk we did with John, there's another individual or two from Public Works there as well, and some individuals from the Verizon operations and engineering side. The elevation of the tower that we're proposing is simply because the signals can't go through the water tank. They need to go up and over the tank. If the tank was only 60 feet high, we might be talking about a 90-foot tower instead. Our best information is the tower's around, I think, 122 feet in height or something like that. I'm doing that off the top of my head. We'll propose building the tower just high enough so that our antennas can have clear line of sight up over the top and not interfere with the existing antennas that T-Mobile and Clearwire have. Not only because the city's interest in potentially generating more revenue, but also because your code requires additional co-location on any new tower that's built. In other words, additional users need to be able to use it. We propose to extend the tower over time. We propose that because we only need to be at a certain elevation. We could build the thing much higher and go at a higher elevation, but maybe no one in the future would come, and it would be silly to have a 155 or 160-foot tower there, and 30-some-odd feet below the top would be one set of antennas and this giant steel mass sticking up in the air. So we're proposing an extension to be done as additional users come, again, to satisfy the co-location needs that the code has and the city's interest in gaining additional revenue as well. Again, the concerns that John mentioned were mostly in regards to people co-locating onto the tank itself. Yes, we would need equipment, we would need access, et cetera, but this was thought of a way to maybe meet in the middle where we're still going to need access to the property and there's still going to be underground utilities and whatnot, but we're not onto the tank structure itself that provides some difficulties, I guess, or potential difficulties when you're trying to use and operate and maintain the tank over time itself. Why is Verizon Wireless looking to be in the area? The same reason the other carriers are. They don't have good signal coverage out in the area, and as more and more people utilize their phones at home or exclusively for their home or business telecommunications needs, users are expecting, and this is the case of all wireless telecommunications, for the service to be effectively ubiquitous. And we are moving now more and more into residential areas because on the commercial corridors and the high mountain sites, those already have existing telecommunication sites where we can co-locate and provide the coverage that the customers expect. And again, that's the same for Verizon Wireless, Clearwire, and the other myriad of carriers out there. Sir?
I think there's an indication in your report. I mean, you're putting these up because the services you don't have don't cover everybody that you wish to serve.
Exactly.
And I mean, I think that's one thing we have to be concerned about, that the people who want those services are able to get them, or get them so that they're quality services. One benefit I see to this, we've already got a structure there that is not a residential structure, and you've already indicated to have those things in the one location as opposed to spread out over the south end area would probably be better aesthetically. I presume if you couldn't do it there, you might find some private property you could try to do it on, or something else. Is that right?
Most likely, yes, sir.
Yeah. So I see a benefit since we have something like a reservoir there, and we've already have a couple installations, that maybe it makes sense just have that concentrated thing there. That's one thing that occurs to me. I know we've got a resident not too far from that location, Tom O'Brien, and I don't know if he wants to comment or not, but I'd welcome him to do so.
I believe I'd like to hear the rest of
Yeah,
this gentleman's
okay.
comments and then
Yeah.
just bring
Sure.
up a couple of points that I'm
Right.
concerned
Oh,
about.
no, I don't think
Do
so.
we have any other comments, questions?
I don't.
Oh, he's not finished.
Yeah,
Okay.
sorry. And I assume there'll be a myriad of questions as well. Part of it, again, I've talked about the operational side and whatnot. Moving on to the permitting side does require a conditional use permit. I'm not sure who the community development attorney, there you are. Call my bluff if I'm wrong. Conditional use is required, pre-application, neighborhood outreach, et cetera, all very standard with conditional use processes. Also, erection of towers in this zone. We're proposing a tower taller than the limit in place by the cone. We'll be seeking basically a variance to do that. Again, if the tank was shorter, we could build a shorter tower, but we've got to get the antennas up over the top of the tank. It's just physics at that point. Another variance as well, and I will need to double check into this, is that there is a request for 100% tower height setback from adjacent residential lines. Well, this piece of property has a public facility zone or something to that extent. Again, completely surrounded by a residential zone. I don't think there's any place on this parcel that you could probably put, other than maybe where the existing water tank is, a tall structure and get a 100% the height of the structure set back from the adjacent property line. So that will be a second variance that we'll be seeking as part of the conditional use process as well. With that, a couple of the initial questions, again, revenue projections, obviously, that can be addressed. Aesthetics. In theory, with enough money and enough engineers, you can make the F4 fly or make a cell phone tower look like a tree, a clock tower, a tree fort, palm tree, whatever else the case may be. We brought forth a design and a location. I'm going to present information. I'm not fully suspecting when I walk out of here we're going to be in the position to confirm a design, sign a lease agreement, and enter into the conditional use process. I'm sure you'll have discussions and come back, and that may be that, yes, Verizon Wireless, we would entertain this, but with the following caveats or design requirements or whatever the case may be. My job will be to take that back to the engineering and operations crew and for that evaluation at that point. Another part was about the health aspects. I don't believe your code requires, I could be wrong, but we can supply what's called a NEAR analysis, which basically shows the amount of energy that will be coming off the antennas in light of the FCC standards. The FCC categorically actually exempts any facilities over 35 feet in height from any RF emissions limits, so we'll be well north of that. I would bet you dollars to donuts for Verizon Wireless emissions, it will probably be less than 2 or 3% of the FCC limits. These are very low power facilities. That's why we have to build them everywhere. These aren't the giant radio and TV towers that you see up on the West Hills Ridge where they build one, pump out 250,000 watts, and cover 4 or 5 counties. These are very, very low power facilities by way of example. And the last one was about a wind integration. I've never ever seen that. I can tell you the amount of additional engineering to handle those lateral wind loads between the foundation and the steel. Verizon Wireless isn't going to pay for that, and if you can pay for it and engineer a way, we will gladly co-locate on that structure. Again, I'm not sure if you've ever seen the foundations that are built for those wind turbine structures. You might be able to put, they're massive. Because the lateral load of the wind needs to keep that structure from turning over like an upturned tree, basically. Again, never seen it, but if the city wants to erect one, we'll pay to go on it. But again, with enough money and engineers, I guess you can do anything. Commissioner Roth, I believe, you had a question or two?
Yeah, well, I think I answered one of them was
Yes.
about the, it's 10 foot per carrier, and you're proposing that could be 2 more carriers on that.
That is an approximate figure, yes, that we would need to have separation. The antennas basically are anywhere from 6 feet to 8 feet in height. You need a little bit of separation, what's called tip to toe, between the antennas. So at about a 20-foot extension would accommodate 2 additional users. How they're configured, what their antennas may look like, Lord only knows. When I began into this industry, my wife said, well, what's going to happen after 2 or 3 years when you put a site here and a site there? And we're still going gangbusters, building sites, rebuilding sites, adding technology, whatever the case may be. So the configuration you see of antennas, again, is speculation on our part, what other users may have. And again, nothing magical about a telecommunications tower. A radio user, the city, E911, whomever, may want to come on and co-locate on that tower, potentially. So again, it would be potentially more than just cellular and PCS type users.
And the base would be a structure that would handle 2 more.
It will be, yes, designed to that, again, for our, and every industry does, for our generic loading, as we call it, for the antennas. If someone wants to come up and put on giant microwave dish type antennas or something, it wouldn't be designed for that. But for standard cellular industry type panel antennas, it will be designed to accommodate 3 carriers. And I believe that's a requirement of your code as well, to facilitate co-location.
Thank you.
Any other questions from commissioners or staff? Anybody else in the audience?
Yes, I had just a couple of comments I'd like to mention. And background-wise, I had a little bit of time working for Motorola Company, erecting antenna towers, and dealing with the FAA and the FCC. I don't know that this tower, even if it gets the 3rd carriers, is going to be tall enough to really interfere with air traffic, so you probably don't have FAA requirements.
We will do, every site that's built will be registered with the FCC, and we'll have a complete FAA and Oregon Department of Avionics review.
Okay, thank you. One of the things that I did when I learned of this coming on the agenda tonight was I looked at where exactly it's located, and there will be impacts to basically 3 of your neighborhoods. It's physically within South End, but it's immediately adjacent to Tower Vista, and within about 3 blocks you have Hazel Grove Wesleyan Farms. I guess I really look at it from a positive standpoint. If it's going to generate revenues for the city, Lord knows we can use revenues. Mm-hmm. And even though John says the numbers aren't probably firm at this stage, obviously we need to be negotiating. I think that one of the things I'd like to ask you to consider is cell phone technology going to be evolving and changing? Because if I think back 20 years to 1991, and I see the advances that have occurred in electronics in general, and in cell phones in particular, it's from the old car packs to something as a flip phone, you can do camera and everything else on it. Are we going to be able to generate revenues for 20 years? Or are we going to have low-flying satellites that will cover large, massive areas without the need for towers? So I think that's one consideration. I think also what I didn't see in the packet, and I printed something out and I'll pass it around, I went to Google Earth, and just so you get a very good impact of how many homes would be affected on almost an immediate basis by raising the height of the tower. If it goes to 3, total 155 feet. It's currently, the tank is at 112. That's about a 38% rise in height, which means you're going to see it usually from a greater distance away for those people who have a direct line of sight to something that high. So be a little concerned about that. And then I'd also suggest that you might want to check with the real estate personnel in the area and find out, we've got a lot of depressed housing right now. So we've certainly taken a hit like everyone else. What is the difference between something selling on the market and producing the proper amount of revenue to the city versus it not selling or selling at a much lower price, and how does that affect our tax base? So those are the things that I just wanted to mention. Pretty much it. Thank you.
Yes, William?
I just want to make sure the irony is not lost that our neighborhood association is called Tower Vista.
That's an interesting point.
I think one other thing that I want to kind of point out, because when I saw the graphic that Ed sent, and I looked at the three, I thought, oh my gosh, that looks like a small Volkswagen bus up there. Three of them actually stacked on top of one another.
Yeah.
And so you're looking at that picture and then kind of looking back at the existing reservoir sites. There's some pictures of the. There's one picture called, I guess it's on the back. It's called Existing Clearwire at T-Mobile Antenna. It's kind of the top of the reservoir. So T-Mobile has these three. They're kind of on the railing at the very top of the reservoir. Those three antennas there represent the T-Mobile kind of antenna, and then kind of down on the tank itself, but just below the top, there's some kind of basically a galvanized piece of pipe with a dish on the top, just below the three antennas that are on top, mounted to the railing. That's the T-Mobile, and they have every one of the columns has one of those on it. So I don't know how big things are going to get. It's kind of hard to say. It seems to me like those things get smaller and smaller over time. But again, that's kind of a projection that I can't say for sure. But my hopes would be we would see something a little less intrusive than three Volkswagen buses mounted up 135
We're
feet.
here for goal setting. Maybe we can find out if the commission has some baseline questions that you need to answer before you even decide if you're interested in having this process go forward at all, or do you have enough information to say, well, apply and we'll see?
I have one more question.
Oh, by all means, I scheduled the evening.
Well, I'll be seeing it.
My question was, what happens to this if the technology changes and it goes away and it's no longer useful? Who takes the tower down, or what happens to it?
I haven't, the city lease, if it was one of our lease agreements, or pretty much any telecommunications carrier, it says at the end of the day, it all goes away. We take it with us. It's our personal property. The city's lease is pretty much crafted, and again, I've not gone through the entirety of it because we're sort of at the first date. I'm not looking to set the wedding guest list quite yet, as it were. The city's lease is designed for entities to co-locate upon an existing structure, so the removal language and whatnot, I very much doubt, is in the city lease with the exception of the equipment. But that would be the intent, is that it's removed at the end of the day, or it's handed over to the city. Again, no reason that 911 radio or Lord knows whom else, city Wi-Fi or whatnot, couldn't go onto the tower as well.
The city could have the option.
Right. Some of you may recall at our Mountain Views Reservoir site, we actually gave part of the site to 911 for their when they were improving their services about 6 years ago or so. And then they built a tower there and put a bunch of antennas on it, and we have some antennas on it too.
I thought of just one other thing that I think, thinking longer term, this year on your agenda is to address the South End concept plan. We all know that that whole area south of there is going to see significant increase in homes and businesses, but particularly homes. It's going to require additional water. We may end up finding ourselves in need of accessing that tower site because of some of those growth issues.
I'll just ask the Commission at this point whether you want to make any advice at all at this point, whether to proceed or not, or if any of your concerns are such a major concern that you don't see any point in it. I guess the thing that concerns me most is John Lewis having concerns, but he's given both positive and negative aspects of the facility, and I guess that's true of almost anything we would see coming before us in any development.
And I think the idea is maybe if you're going to if you want these facilities to serve this public, to cluster them, may be better than separating them out throughout neighborhoods.
My gut feeling is I don't have any major problem with this going forward, but I don't know about the rest of you.
No, I'm good with it going forward.
Okay, that's what we were.
Did we get? I want to make sure we got.
I thought I saw.
Yes.
James?
Yes.
Okay. Very good. Well, thank you for your time.
Thank
you for coming.
Thank you for moving us ahead.
Very much.
Now we're going from 3B to 3A. And that'll be goal planning staff, goal planning. I think we sort of went through the first tier, did we not? Could I go back to the first tier a moment? Enhance the livability of our community, and the reason I bring this up is we have this from the city staff here, and they do mention, for example, the police department facility and staff. Do we mention anywhere, does anybody here mention anywhere the pool? I mean, we still have things.
No, we didn't bring that up, did we?
I don't think it's on the other list, and since some of the facility aspects are under the city's executive staff, I'm wondering, Scott, would you want to see that there too, the pool? Is this something that we would want to address this year? That's the big question.
Well, excuse me, I'm struggling with my voice a little bit today. Yes, but to just single that out, I would say if you want to do that, then you'd also want to talk about the other individual facilities. The pool is an ongoing project for us. The maintenance, as you well know, Commission, we've been dealing with over the last several years. We've made some pretty good strides on the facility maintenance and upkeep, and some pretty significant improvements. And we're going to. It's just that's just an ongoing maintenance and operational issue for us, as we view it. As we'll continue to explore the items that need to be done and bring those forward as it's appropriate to do that, and within the budget process, or if it's an emergency item, we tend to bring those up. Yeah, sure, if you want to put it on your goals, but I would also say, to take that facility by itself, we've got significant issues with the Ermatinger House. Right. We need to decide what we're doing with the end of the trail site.
So all of these things are actually on this list that you've got in this little packet, and we're going to touch on all of them.
Okay.
Yeah.
So maybe we can, sort of jump in and sort of let me remind you, previously at Oregon City goal setting, what we did was start on that matrix, that big matrix, and also all of the individual conversations that I had with the commissioners. And so we've sort of done the top line in the sense that all of the things that people said were most important to you and things that executive staff said were most important. What we've done is reduce those now to a matrix that's on pages 2 and 3 of the little packet that you've got. And what I'd like to do is start out by going through those to make sure that they're properly captured, and then talk a little bit about sequencing and about capacity. And then, having done that, do two other things. One is talk about citizen participation. Once we've got a sense of what the sort of agenda is for the year, talk about citizen participation in connection with that so that it's got a real basis. And then go through the rest of the list. Each of the commissioners suggested some other things that could be on that list, talk about whether those should be added. The one thing that I want to remind you is that we talked about this as a 2-year sort of set of priorities. Everything is kind of sequenced over this next year, and one possibility is to defer some things to 2012, which might open up some capacity in 2011. So let's be real clear about that capacity. Last time we began with a history lesson where I learned the difference between a prairie schooner and a Conestoga wagon.
Yes.
And remember that the difference was that the prairie schooner is even smaller, and that your capacity is very limited, and that most of the city's capacity is already taken up with the day-to-day business of, police and community services and community development and public works and everybody else, and that these priorities are really just kind of the things that are on top of that load. So let's just, and then the one other thing I want to point out is that that staff reorganized these so that they fit under the headings of the 6 goals. We've only touched on 5 of them because we're going to talk about citizen participation sort of after we go through everything else. So under Goal 1, Build a Sustainable Future, the one thing that's on there is creation of Cove Habitat Task Force. And, of course, that is that citizen participation regarding that. And we need to talk about advisory committees before we're done.
Okay.
So under Goal 2, and there are some other suggestions under Goal 1 that we'll get to later. Under Goal 2, Cove Project reinstatement agreement currently in place until October 2011. Rivers Project, invitation from the City Commission to CenterCal to bring the Rivers Disposition and Development Agreement to the Urban Renewal Commission.
Yes.
Beaver Creek Concept Plan, making the industrial lands in the Beaver Creek Concept Plan shovel-ready for future industrial development. And then a possible action item, sort of depending on those first ones, is that the current economic development strategy is really based on some assumptions about Cove Project, Rivers Project, and so on. Once decisions are made on those, it may be appropriate to update the strategy, and we went through a number of elements that could be part of that updating. Jim?
I guess the concern that comes to my mind is framing these as secondary to or sequenced after the Cove, the Rivers, and the Beaver Creek Concept Plan. When I offered this during the retreat, I by no means meant to imply that they would be subsidiary or secondary to these other projects. I think many of them can and should proceed right away and be parallel to those projects, not secondary to them.
I basically agree with Jim. The point is that we know less how to approach some of these other things, but I think some of these other things require us initiating some discussions with other members in the community. And I agree with you that these other 2 things do not have to come to any kind of conclusion and decisions before we start. And I think it's up to us to prioritize those bulleted items there, that for us to start initiating some communications outside those projects, and I agree with you from that standpoint.
So let me ask 2 questions. One is, some sense of prioritization, and the other is a sense of capacity. And that probably goes to you and David about the capacity to take on more of these things.
Well, there is a fundamental question which I'm looking at in that first sentence in this block where Joe has these things listed that Commissioner Nocita was just talking about. That first sentence that says, once the decisions are made, it may be appropriate to update the strategy. And by that, I think you mean the economic development strategy, which right now the strategy we currently have in place is heavily dependent on the Rivers and the Cove as sort of your engine, if you will, for a lot of the rest of the strategy. So it may still be worthwhile to update the strategy itself once the decision is made on those projects. And that's kind of another project, but it doesn't have a bullet by it. So I guess I think maybe we should ask that question first, if the commission wants to wait and let those projects kind of work through our system and make your decisions, or do you want to actually update your economic development strategy? It was updated 2 years ago, I believe, so it's not, arguably you have a little more life left in it, but if you really feel you need to change it, then I just thought we should talk about that, because...
The point I'll raise is the very text of the economic development strategy itself says that it should be updated as new opportunities arise and new situations arise. And that development strategy initially was done in 2004. That's a long time ago now. And the economy is just completely different than it was in 2004.
It was updated in 2006.
Yeah.
Well, even then, Dan, it's different.
No, I'm just
It's
clarifying.
now.
We just want to know, do you want to update it?
It's slowed down.
Again,
Well, it's slowed down, but it's also qualitatively different. It's
it's
different.
changing every month.
Yeah.
But, I mean, for that reason, I think that the strategy itself needs to be reevaluated per its own directive and text, and that there are other opportunities out there now that are staring us right in the face, and I think we would just be irresponsible not to grab them by the horns and pursue them.
And do you want to speak to this?
The one thing I would add is the existing strategy isn't only the rivers in the Cove. There's reference there to downtown and the North End also. So I don't think it excludes some of the areas you're talking about.
Well, I was going to suggest that rather than talking about after the Cove and the Rivers projects, we maybe talk about concurrence, doing things somewhat at the same time, not having to be after that. And then rather than updating the strategy, how about if we look at some of these items and see if we want to add them to the strategy, and in that process, maybe there would be an update to the strategy. But rather than starting with let's update the strategy, maybe look at some of these specific things that have been brought up and look into them, explore them, and then add them to our strategy or not.
Yeah, and I think we might want to look, I don't necessarily think today, but look at these individual goals to find out how their relative priorities might be in there. But as pointed out, we are actively looking at things in the downtown area continuously. One thing I don't see in these bulleted items, and I know it was referenced somewhere in here, I'm sure, I don't know if we're under any time limitations in looking at the South End concept plan, but it's not in this block of Goal 2.
It's actually under Goal 4. I'm not sure why, but it's under Goal 4. But it's under Goal 4 with a blank under milestones.
Yeah, I guess, I mean, if we're, maybe it's a place to think of putting it in Goal 1 among these other activities. Because we're talking about things that were, well, I guess not. I'll take that back. We don't have the, I'll take that back. We don't seem to have either of our current areas, the Park Place or the Beaver Creek concept plan. Well, we do mention industrial, shovel. We do mention it. Beaver Creek concept plan, shovel ready. We do have a, and I agree. I don't think it should have the same priorities as Park Place, but I don't know if we have any kind of time limits in terms of Metro as to whether when we look at the South End concept plan.
We are pushing the acceptability of getting that concept plan done at this point. We have construction excise tax money set aside to do that concept plan. That was, what did we do, was that 2002 when we expanded the UGB? 2002, 2004, we had a 5-year requirement to get that done.
Right.
That's why I'm proposing it again this year to make that a priority to get done.
And do you feel it should be under goal 4 as opposed to goal 2? I guess we don't have a plan yet, so
Well, I don't have a plan yet.
Yeah.
I guess we.
Well, but all these other action items here, there's a lot of them are planning activities. I guess I've got no particular issue. With it down there. Do we mention Park Place at all?
Well, I'm not sure what we do with Park Place. We've done the concept plan, we've done the zoning for it. Until you can get something annexed out there,
Yeah, okay.
and we don't. The city
We
doesn't
have
drive.
had-
The city doesn't drive annexations. Those are
We
private
have had
property
some
driven.
annexation, at least one major annexation in the Beaver Creek
So,
concept plan.
so Tony, what should go in that 2011 milestones for South End concept planning? And then, Jim?
What I had proposed was that we begin that process of doing the concept plan for South End, and we have construction excise tax money to pay for that as part of.
Okay. No, that's fine.
And how far do you expect to get in 2011 if you begin it?
Let's get
I
through.
won't be finished. It'll probably take 12 to 15, 16 months.
Okay. Jim?
On the Beaver Creek concept plan, I want to ask what precisely needs to happen to make it shovel-ready? And does the fact that only half of it has been annexed impact whether it can be made shovel-ready?
It does need sewer. Sewer needs to be extended down Beaver Creek.
I guess backing up one step, Metro has just amended the 2040 concept map to reflect the Beaver Creek concept plan that was adopted by the city, then remanded by the Land Use Board of Appeals. That's going to DLCD right now to be acknowledged. Once that acknowledgement happens, I need to bring the concept plan back to the city to adopt new findings demonstrating compliance with Metro criteria for concept plans as well as our own criteria. So just from the process of land use, we've still got some work to do there. And once that happens, we still need to write the code, the actual zoning code. So we're just adopting the concept plan. So we would come back and need to rewrite the code. But then for the shovel-ready component of it, for the North Employment Campus area, which is where we'd be talking about making it shovel-ready, you want to talk about what's required to be shovel-ready?
Once we get out through those steps, it's the issue of all the utility extensions and how to finance those. Okay, that's the biggest part.
And you're not talking about road improvements, so you're just talking about utility infrastructure.
Right.
We've got the concept plan in there, but I've brought this up on several occasions. I think more than identifying infrastructural needs, I think it's also a case of identifying what possible industrial uses are there. I've already suggested we should have a dialogue with the college and the school district, since those, I think, are central public entities there that could benefit from and could benefit to whatever occurs there. So I think it's just more than the code. I think it's more than identifying the infrastructure needs and how to finance them. It's also a case of having some good partnerships in that area.
So that's really not as much whether to do it. What you're targeting is how to do it.
Is how to do it. And I think this ought to be going on at the same time as the rest of this does.
But what we're trying to find out here is if you want to do it, because there are many steps like that one and some others.
I think, even though there wasn't support from the whole commission, I think part of the reason we didn't have support for the whole commission on taking that particular vote to item to the voters is we perhaps didn't have as much buy-in in that area as we could have had, and I think this could be a process by which that happens.
Mark, you're nodding your head. Do you want to speak to that?
Oh, no, I think so. But I think it also has to do with just you know, the services issue, the city services issue, and all that. And so I think it's kind of we're in a different place now to start looking at that more.
And I guess I'd also like to remind the commission that, trying to remember about how far back we started doing this, it was 2007 or so, where we started, approving annexation agreements with, to accommodate police funding and whatnot. And, none of those, some of those have sunsets on them, and those funds don't become available until we get those annexed and building permits are applied for, because they're collected at the building permit stage. So we'd historically, in working with Chief Harris, had come up with a formula to start addressing some of that gap between when those homes first came on and the delay between that revenue coming on to the general fund. So just to let you know, we historically tried to accommodate some of that, but none of that comes in unless we move something forward.
To hear from other commissioners on this one.
Well, I'm kind of lost here. So let me know what we're doing here. So we're working on our staff is going to work on the Cove, the rivers, the Beaver Creek concept plan, plus the economic development. Is that kind of what we're doing here?
Well, not quite yet.
Okay.
Cove Rivers, we're deciding sort of exactly what's the expectation regarding Beaver Creek concept plan.
Okay.
And then we're going to come back and talk about what is the expectation regarding either the economic development strategy or some of the specific elements here.
Thank you, Joe.
Yeah.
Yes.
So regarding Beaver Creek concept plan, Doug and Rocky have sort of weighed in.
I would be all in favor of pursuing that.
Yeah, I don't see any problem to pursuing that at this time, too.
If I might just add one more thing there. We already have industrial lands, zone industrial lands south of the college that are already within the city limits. They were annexed some years ago, and absolutely nothing's happened there. And in order to have something happen anywhere in that area, we've got to kind of have a view for what can happen. I mean, what if we actually trigger in our currently annexed land some activities? I think that's going to go a long way to saying what can happen in the area that we're hoping ultimately will get annexed. I think it'd be a major trigger in terms of interest.
Well, I think one of the biggest limitations you see to why none of that is developing out there is it's either general industrial, campus industrial, and there are no services. In Beaver Creek Road, the sanitary sewer. Well, I'm sorry, it's the sewer. Sewer's the big one. Chasing sewer all the way down Beaver Creek Road gets to be cost prohibitive for an industrial site.
So I'll move on to the next big box, which is economic development strategy and these bullets under it. And I want to take full responsibility for the language. This is what I thought I heard last time, that because the economic development strategy sort of was as focused as it is on Cove and Rivers, that to revise the strategy, ought to wait on those decisions. But that doesn't mean the individual items don't have to. It also doesn't mean that you can't work on the economic development strategy. Mm-hmm. So what about that as a priority for this year? What would you like to see this year? And again, keeping in mind the capacity of staff and the capacity of the commission to sort of really keep focused. Jim, did you want to?
Well, I since I suggested all these, I could flesh all of them out further to describe each of them. I described them to an extent during the retreat. But, if the commission wants to hear more detail on this, I could describe more, them each in more detail.
In your mind, is there priority among these?
Well, I don't know who suggested Beaver Creek Hamlet. I didn't do that.
I did.
I'm not really sure what jurisdictional or power or authority the City of Oregon City has.
We don't. If I might just say what I was talking about. We have the The commission actually, I think, as a whole, voted against pulling into the urban reserve the area along Enrici Road. It is a trigger point in terms of concerns, I think, on the part of the Beaver Creek Hamlet. When I put this forward, actually, it was just initiating a dialogue between the city and the Beaver Creek Hamlet of what happens in that urban reserve area that perhaps could meet both the visions of Oregon City and Beaver Creek Hamlet. That would be just an initiation. Obviously, that's something that probably will not come to fruition maybe for 30, 40, or 50 years, depending on how things occur there. But I don't think we have to have the kinds of tensions between the Beaver Creek Hamlet and the city of Oregon City that we've had in the past. I don't think it's necessary. And that's why I put that one there. But we can initiate dialogues very early on, if nothing else, to perhaps decrease the discomfort level, and maybe in the process increase a little bit the comfort level between the two communities. And that's why I put it forward.
Does it belong under the economic development strategy, or is it?
Well, it is. I mean, it ultimately is an economic development strategy, I think, because I'm sure what they don't want to see is residential development continuing to move that direction. I mean, that's their big fear.
I was just wondering if it was more of a quality of life.
It is a quality of life, but
Or how about goal?
I don't have any angst what goal occurs in, just as long as it's
Well, I don't want to.
And I guess the important thing too to remember is that once we did urban and rural reserves, historically we brought properties into the UGB, then we did a concept plan. Now under the new rules with Metro, you do the concept plan first, and then you go through the whole UGB expansion process. So, while I understand wanting to address their concerns up front, I don't see us doing anything down there for a long.
Well, I agree with that.
Okay.
But
how much energy goes into that, I guess?
The energy might be just a few people sitting together from the hamlet and from the city. Just talking. Well, that's an interest I have. I mean, that's true. But
do they? I mean, seriously, I don't know.
No, it's a community planning organization. Okay. It's an equivalent to our neighbors.
Well, it's a hamlet. It's more than a community planning organization.
What's Darrell?
They have no direct.
No, they don't. But they've got a bigger voice at the county level than a CPO would have.
And again, I just want to say that what I want to do is figure out sort of capacity, focus, where the energy goes, where the time goes. So, all these things are sort of in play. In the end, where does the capacity go?
Could I suggest that as commissioners, we prioritize these, and they just kind of take a little toll up there and see what comes up on top?
Does that make sense to everybody?
Can I just put one more piece of information in before you, because it may affect, on the south of Kenema employment area, if I recall, that's probably what Mr. Edgar was, the bowl. When we did urban and rural reserves, we didn't put that in to an urban reserve. So technically, we're not going there for 40 to 50 years. And, we could certainly look into with Metro if we're going to go back and start revisiting these decisions that were just made at the regional level for identifying urban and rural reserves, but I imagine there's probably going to be some pushback.
Do we have a map of that handy, Tony?
I don't
like back in the David's
check with you.
rack? Because I have a recollection that a lot of that was already in the UGB but not annexed. Is that the case for it? Okay. It's actually outside of the UGB.
Correct.
Okay.
If it's the bowl part that Mr. Edgar was talking about, kind of.
But my recollection is we did ask for it in, but Metro chose not to add it.
We chose not to.
We looked at it at the request, and the commission determined not to have it. We didn't make it anything. We didn't make a recommendation of rural reserve. We didn't make a recommendation of urban reserve. So it's kind of, Metro kind of punted and made their areas nothing. There was no designation assigned to them at this point.
We were talking about where again?
South of Kenema.
Isn't there an area that's within our urban growth boundary south of Kenema?
Yes, there's a string of tax lots along 99E.
Right. The thing I would see as problematic in any kind of short-term development was to extend the urban services, you go through a whole area that's not in the city. So I don't know if it's a mile or not, but it is really disjoint. And while I see this as a potential industrial development area, the cost of getting infrastructure there, I think, would be really problematic.
That was one of the findings, as I recall, was the concern about pumping sanitary.
The other problem is it's basically just the narrow frontage along 99E there, because if you go in back more than one lot width, then you're into really steep slopes.
Yeah.
So before we go into detail on all these, would it be all right with everybody to do what Kathy suggested?
Yes.
Just do a quick and dirty sort of,
Yeah.
where's the energy? So let me ask you two questions. One, commissioners or commissioners and staff?
Commissioners and staff, because don't they have to put forth the effort to do it?
How about if we do those in different colors?
Yeah.
And secondly, does anybody need any clarification on what any of these mean? And some of them I shortened from the words that are in front of you, like local civic ecology was much longer, was strategy to localize economy / civic ecology. Industry clusters said, i.e. food processor for small organic farmers. So any clarification that we need for any of these, Doug and David?
I don't know. I mean, when you look at these industry for food process for small organic farmers and so forth, no matter what the agricultural activity is, there's an odor associated with it, be it organic or inorganic, whatever it is. The thing is, it's one of these things I think we find on the fringe of Oregon City. I think it would be something really nice to talk in terms of the Beaver Creek Hamlet about. But I don't know where in our industrial area this might occur, except possibly in that area across from the college, because you have a big program there in terms of the horticultural program.
Well, let's see if it rises to anybody's.
Yeah.
So I have a question
Yeah.
about what downtown, I'm not sure, what were we thinking? Because we're doing a lot of stuff downtown.
So it should be high on the priority list.
The commission has really got the gas pedal down already on the EID and several other things that are happening down there. So was that one of us, one of you? What was that?
I suggested that, and I thought I explained it at the retreat. I'll explain it again. We don't have a downtown redevelopment plan. Okay?
For refreshing.
My thoughts on this crystallized when Mr. Arambula back in October gave his presentation on turning Main Street into a two-way street and explained with, I thought, great clarity and specificity how much, how there was a correlation between a healthy retail environment and the number of average trips on a street. And he gave examples of other streets, in the metro area. And he also mentioned during that presentation, aside from that downtown Oregon City, he felt, needed specifically 2 parking decks. After that discussion, during that evening, I talked to him, and I talked to him about the fact that we don't have a downtown plan. And I actually pointed it to him very specifically, how much does something like that cost? And he said about $350,000. He put a precise, a specific figure on how much it costs to develop a downtown plan, complete with, the design, sequencing, the catalyst project, and identifying them.
So that really illustrates these aren't all equal.
No.
But let's get a quick and dirty
Yeah.
read. And
Thank you.
can I just ask you?
I have a question, though. So
Yeah.
we do have our downtown community plan, and that's been adopted into the comprehensive plan. So is this different than that?
Yeah. I think it would be. I
So
mean, we
would
take
we-
that in, elements of that into account, but as far as specific financial strategies, say design standards, priority projects, we don't have that. And I'm concerned for a couple of reasons. One is that I'm concerned that things happen piecemeal without an overall vision, because I think that can lead to things happening poorly. I mean, we've been, some of the things that have happened in the past couple of weeks, for example, the money we've gotten for the sidewalks, Main Street Oregon City distributed this flyer about selling off the 10th and Main lot. And all of this is happening in a haphazard and piecemeal fashion. It's good that they're happening, but if they happen without an overall, if they don't fit into a context of an overall plan and strategy, I think that it could not turn out well.
So I'm just going to ask you all, pick three.
Well, I personally think downtown should go to the top. I think in terms of the views of what should be in it, that's something that we need to discuss.
So should we pull downtown out of this and say that that's different from?
Yeah.
So don't pick downtown as well. And I'm going to just circle downtown rather than redevelopment plan. The downtown is a focus, and that goes to the top.
I want my first.
Category all.
Category all of its own.
Well, I think you can scratch out south of Kenema based on what Tony has said.
I mean, we can look into it some more, but I don't think it's on the table.
It's probably not a 2-year
No.
thing.
So I'm about to cross off south of Kenema.
Because that would potentially take a lot of energy and time and resources away from some things that might be more imminent and achievable.
Okay, so pick three out of Beaver Creek Hamlet, resource inventory, industry clusters, urban renewal, bonding, civic ecology, localized energy, and updating the strategy now. Everybody got three? Anybody not have three? Okay, so commissioners, how many have Beaver Creek Hamlet in one of their top three?
No.
How many staff have Beaver Creek Hamlet in one of their top three? Resource inventory, top three. Commissioners? 1, 2, 3, 4.
Yeah,
It's
fine.
something the chamber's
Five.
working on.
So remind me as we go through this which color's which. So 5 means commissioners, staff, one of your top three.
If we're 5 up there, I'm hardwired.
Excellent. Industry clusters, one of your top
If we don't include the specific examples,
Yeah.
and in general industry cluster, I put it in my
In
top
general.
three.
So there's
In
one.
general.
So in general, how
In
many
general.
commissioners in their top three? 1, 2, 3, and staff. How many in your top three? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Is that just because there's a majority of commissioners, or is that independent?
I think that's one of those for me. Kind of, it depends because some
Yeah,
of these
it
are very
depends.
broad numbers.
Yes.
We're going to have the discussion once we get these numbers up. These numbers don't. We're going to erase them as soon as we've got them up here. So urban renewal bonding. Commissioners. in
I
your
think
top-
that might also be a separate discussion. Specifically, what I want to say to that is, and having been here for future agenda item and not stuck in rush hour traffic, when we tabled that item last Wednesday on these 3 charter amendments, there had been a discussion about some kind of charter commission. And the city attorney had given us a whole outline of, the process. And I want to add that into our goal that's somewhere, probably in citizen involvement. And I think that should go into that discussion about a charter review process.
Stating out of the goal one, yeah. No.
So we're going to take it out of economic development?
Take it out.
Okay. There it goes. And again, that just means it's off of this list. Civic ecology, one of your top three. 1, 2, 3. And staff? 1. So there's one that, clearly we need to talk about a little bit. Localized energy, one of your top three. 1. And staff? And how about updating the strategy? And staff? Okay. So it looks like the ones that come up are, the ones that look like they jump up are resource inventory, industry clusters, civic ecology, but, so we didn't have a lot of, Nancy, you raised your hand. Step,
We're going for the top three. We said get the top three.
so what
We've got
about
them.
those as,
I think, I looked at it more of that localized economy thing. I mean, I almost combine that with some of the industry clusters. So I'm gonna,
Yeah. It's good.
okay, so industry clusters, local economy, civic ecology could fit together. Actually, resource inventory kind of, this sounds like it all kind of fits together, which is a good thing.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay,
You did
so.
good, Joe. Good idea, Kathy.
So let's define what this project is exactly. We're putting this
now
on
we're in trouble.
somebody's work plan, and we need to figure out what exactly the expectation is of them and how much capacity that's going to take.
Okay, I'd like to start having that discussion about capacity. And I hope we were going to talk about it, and David had given us a memo prior to the retreat on new staff and the whole fire annexation pledge. And then there had been this whole discussion that broke out about what the fire annexation meant or didn't mean. And then we had follow-up emails about what the fire annexation meant and didn't mean. So I'd like to see if we have come to a conclusion as to what the fire annexation pledge meant or doesn't mean, and how that feeds into our discussion of capacity and whether we can add capacity.
Perfect. So that's actually under Goal 6. You will see fire annexation pledge says exactly what Jim just said. Develop definitive information on what was pledged. So where are we on that?
Nancy, can you summarize any of the language from your recollection of looking into those records?
I can.
Okay, great.
First of all, if all five commissioners agree that we can increase the rate of taxation, we can do it. Or it takes three then to take it to the electorate. And does that boil down to?
I think you're right.
Yep.
You know, when I look back at that language and kind of pieced it all together, it'd be interesting to see how many of you did that and where you ended up.
How many of us were here?
Well, where I ended up was, yes, we have some capacity even without a vote, even without I mean, arguably you could do some fees, you could look at some things. And I kept asking myself, I wonder what the public thinks. You know, I know what we said in these words, and I know what we, people before us or people in this room said or thought or interpreted from our research. But I'm curious and actually real concerned about what the public perception is and whether it's worth the risk of, I guess, a punch in the nose, political punch in the nose or a real one, in looking at the next 2 years and how urgent is it that we increase our capacity.
You had 2/3 of the people approve the fire annexation. I cannot believe a good portion of that was because of a promise that we made.
Or their perception of it. That's what it is.
Yeah.
Three-fourths.
That's a lot of support.
Yeah. But that was under the framework of our pledge.
Yes.
Now, it's easy. Three of us think we need to increase the capacity, we can take it to the vote of the people. All five of us agree to do so, we can do it.
That's a good discussion. Let's have it.
And we have a citizen who might have voted on this particular issue.
As I recall, one of the reasons that people in my neighborhood voted for it was that we were promised we would get additional staffing at the firehouse that had been vacant.
Yeah, that's true.
That has backed off due to economic conditions and urban renewal districts around the county. So, you know, we've got some people already who are not particularly thrilled with the fact that the promise was not completely fulfilled.
So, commissioners, wait, so folks, let me ask the commissioners, the capacity is partly determined by that pledge.
Mm-hmm.
You perhaps could increase capacity by revisiting that. What about that? Jamie raised the question.
Go ahead, Joe.
Well, I just wanted to ask David, in your memo, when you talked about these additional positions like an assistant finance director, an assistant city manager, et cetera, did that necessarily require additional tax revenue? And the reason I raised that question is because there was this whole discussion about new programs and whether just doing something different, even if we could fund it, constituted a new program, even if we could fund it within the existing budget. So I just want to get clarification from you on your memo as it relates to, new revenues through taxes or other
Let me give you the best
options.
answer I can tonight, and I'm going to take this microphone because Nancy's going to get mad at me. Part of that's going to depend on, I really need to go through this budget process this year and see what our revenue projections are going to be before I give you a definitive answer. I'm going to guess somewhat that we could probably fund one of those positions with our existing resources. I don't think we could do more than that without looking at enhancing revenues. And one of the things that I put on the list, and I'm pretty sure that I might have sent out a memo to the previous commissioners, not our two new folks, about the Parks and Open Space Utility fee that Scott Archer had talked about briefly during our retreat. And essentially that is taking our, last year at the budget hearing, we heard a lot of concern about the pool and about deferred maintenance and just how terribly expensive that is for the city, and wanting to try to find a way to address that. So that's, right after that, that's when I started talking to Scott and others on the staff about doing such a thing. I know that they did it in Medford, they've done it in other cities around the country, and the commission can actually approve that. As a commission, you can approve utilities and the associated fees and even the increases that go with them. Those don't require a vote of the people. You might still want to do a vote of the people, but it doesn't require it. So you have flexibility there. Now, if that were to generate, and that would again depend on where you set that fee. So if you set the fee at $4 per household, it's going to generate X number of dollars of income every year. If you set it at $2, it'll be half of that. So whatever income that would generate, in my view, what we would then do is offset that amount from the Parks Department, and then you would have that amount to spend somewhere else. So your capacity would increase. Let's say it generated $400,000 a year, then you would have an additional $400,000 for positions or programs.
Betty and then
Well, I know that with the fire annexation, I went door to door and talked to people and asked them to vote for it. And I assured them that the city of Oregon City was not going to create new programs for 5 years. And I heard a lot of people in our community say, are you really, really sure? If you are, then I'll vote for it. I mean, I'm not going to go back on that personally.
Doug?
I guess it's how do you define programs. Obviously, we have a Parks and Recreation program.
Yes.
You're looking at it from one standpoint. You're looking at it, well, if we do this and first of all, you give Parks and Open Spaces some guaranteed funds, and then you've got the revenue that we're currently giving to the recreation program to deal with some of the facility needs.
Yes.
I, as a citizen, would expect to see, all right, how is that going to improve our open space? I mean, if you're just going to take the 4 people that we have in parks maintenance and cemetery maintenance and fund them another way, and we don't do anything additionally for parks and open spaces, I couldn't support that at all.
Right. Yeah. And you may want to take a percentage of that and use it to enhance services in that area, which I think is a great idea.
So David and Tony have their hands up, but I also want to make room for Kathy and Rocky at any time to weigh in here.
I agree with what was just said.
Mayor said something at the retreat that struck me on this thing.
I got to write this down.
To me, doing the transportation utility fee is just really an end run on this agreement with the general fund. With the PMUF, that was different. It's not a general fund thing. But to me, okay, we're not going to raise your taxes here, but we're going to charge you 39 cents over here. And provide a general fund service. So I think it's all wrong.
Me too.
And with respect to how good the fire annexation was, I mean, basically it gave the general fund an extra $1.2 million a year. We got rid of $3 million worth of fire expenses. We got rid of $1.8 million of taxes, or $1.2 million ahead. So, and that's enabled us to throw $600,000 or $800,000 at the community development and still increase the general fund balance. And that was one of the reasons we were able to loan South Fork the money too. And the general fund balance is still growing. So I think to think about needing to go out and increase taxes or ask for taxes is really out of line. Because we don't need to. I mean, if we're sitting here looking at going to deficit, then that'd be a different story.
Yeah.
And I guess, I was going to just kind of echo what David was saying in terms of, what the fire annexation has provided the city in terms of bolstering the general fund. But, we are in an economic downturn that is just prolonged and severely deep. And Oregon is not, I don't know that we've bottomed yet with the number of foreclosures we're still seeing. And what that does, though, is it has a huge impact on my department, building and planning. We can talk about adding positions, but realistically, we are going to have a serious conversation about additional funds for another year to try and ride this thing out with the minimal staff that we have, or we are going to be laying people off. I'm going to be asking for more money than I did last year in order to keep the folks employed in my departments. And you got to remember, I've got 2 plans examiners, 2 inspectors. If I cut one across the board, I mean, we're down to below a skeleton crew. So these are just some of the, while I appreciate wanting to provide more staff help, I'm struggling with how I'm going to keep the ones that I've got right now. And maybe that's a decision that we make, that,
Well,
we want to focus somewhere else.
If I might, I don't think you have to make that decision now, and the reason I say that is because the parks and open space utility fee, if that were something you wanted to pursue, and at our last weekend part of this goal setting, we talked about whether Scott would proceed to do some of that work. We're talking about at least a year-long effort for him to put that together. So I think it's prudent to probably start that work in anticipation of the fire annexation pledge expiration. And then at the end of that period, or maybe this time next year, things will look different, and we'll have some of that background work done, and then you can have the discussion again about whether you want to implement it. But getting the work done and moving in that direction with the thought that we may actually do that one day is still going to take some time.
So jumping down to the very last thing under Goal 6 is the park maintenance utility fee begin 18-month process of exploration so that a possible measure could be submitted to vote of the people after annexation pledge terminates. It is sounding from all of this like the capacity is not going to increase anytime soon. And so I want to go back to the question I asked, which is there's a sort of project here, and it seems like a fine project. And the question is, how large a project is this? I'd like someone to define it so that we know how this fits, into that prairie schooner. Scott?
Just a quick clarification on the language while we're talking about this. On the parks maintenance utility fee, it says that so that the possible measure could be submitted to the vote, to vote of the people. Again, to confirm, I think David just said it a few minutes ago, it can be approved by the commission without a vote. It could be referred to the voters if you wanted to.
I think
but
at the time when
I'm just clarifying that language on here for this. We might want to word that a little bit differently.
Well, I might have been trying to accommodate myself. I mean, I suggested, I think David Werner was referring to that. I felt if this is going to be done, it ought to go to a vote of the people. If we're not going to wait for the ability to increase the taxes in 2 years, that it ought to go to a vote to the people. What I would say is I think it should be initiated this year, so we can start getting the input. The Parks and Rec Advisory Committee should look at this and determine what would be the expectations in terms of open space and parks maintenance. That is, I would have more expectations of what it would do than we're doing now. I mean, I look at, we got a lot of open spaces that have a lot of invasive species growing in them with almost no control of them.
And Doug, if I might add, we were thinking public facilities, parks and public public spaces, not just open spaces. So that would, if the pool isn't a park, we wanted the flexibility of using that money to help fix the pool or whatever other public facilities.
Okay, then it sounds like, to me, you're trying to deal with almost everything except maybe the staff you have to plan events.
Well, everything Scott has to deal with that doesn't have a funding source other than the general.
When we talk about parks and open spaces, I did not think of facilities as being part of that.
Yeah.
So-
I think we need clarification, of course.
And we're going to keep going through this. Before we're done with economic development, I want to ask about this project. If you add it to your priorities for this year, what are we talking about in terms of scope? What are your expectations? And let's, again, get to the end. Is the capacity there? Jim?
It's 7:10, and we've got a lot of goals to discuss tonight.
Mm-hmm.
And I've got to say, I don't particularly think that we could flesh that out tonight.
No, that's right.
And I mean, instead of saying to us, how is that going to look?
I agree.
I think we need to say, what is our process for fleshing it out? What is the
Okay.
timeline for fleshing it out to determine how it's going to look?
Okay.
And it's not going to be done tonight. I have a lot of ideas. I'll write my own little memo on it. But we're not going to come to a resolution on that tonight.
I agree.
So my question is, are you thinking about something big here, something small here, something in between? Because again, part of my goal here is to make sure that we're within our capacity.
Yeah, well, I'll give you an example of process that I would say or one element of that process of how we would flesh that out. Civic ecology is a pretty specific term. It's almost a proprietary term. It's really something that that is described by Sarah Architects, both as for economic relocalization, for citizen involvement and their kind of self-determination economically in neighborhoods, et cetera. One thing I would propose is to have Sarah come and give a presentation on civic ecology. That even might inform the other two. I mean, that's one, way in which I could see us fleshing out this as a priority in its scope, et cetera. But again, I don't think we're going to come to any conclusions tonight on it.
Well, I think the 5 and 5 speaks highly for the resource inventory, and I think that the Chamber of Commerce is already currently working on that. I think if the city were to just kind of partner with them, that might be kind of a lower impact kind of thing just to kind of get it started.
I think, too, with the Onward Oregon.
Onboard Oregon?
No, Onward.
Onward Oregon, okay.
Talking about maybe doing a resource inventory.
Okay.
If we take a break,
Sure.
and then we'll move on to goal 3.
Yay, we're at the 3.
And let me just start going through the priorities under critical facility needs. Library, identify, agree on a site, and acquire the site if possible during 2011. And there was this note that actually goes back to the conversation earlier. Just make sure that everybody who's working on it is communicating and coordinating with one another so that people aren't working at cross purposes and having different communications with the same people. Public Works decide where to build this year. Then, actually, maybe we'll come back to this one because I think this was sort of the catch-all for everything else. Police station reevaluate in 2 years, not at 2011. End of the Oregon Trail, make a decision by the end of 2011. Ermitinger House, make a decision by the end of 2011.
I think the latter we have to do by the end of 2011. I don't know if we can make a decision on the end of the Oregon Trail by the end of 2011. And I was just talking about the status of Ermitanger House, I think puts it at
A high
level.
priority.
If I might, I just want to, you folks remember probably that we had that study done. It was completed, it was presented to you, and there were lots of questions that night.
Yeah.
Rocky was passionate about with the consultant right here.
And we had a lot of head nods in the audience.
Absolutely.
too.
And so one of the things I'm wanting to know is I'm just nervous about letting that just sit there.
Yeah.
And people asking us, what are you going to do with the end of the Oregon Trail?
Yeah.
What are you going to do? And so Mayor, when you say that it's not as imminent a problem as Ermitanger, that is absolutely right. But it also doesn't mean that just because you decide, I think we said the decision on the end of the Oregon Trail by the end of 2011, that doesn't mean we're going to build, that doesn't mean you have to have the design done and all that. We just want to go back and look at that study and see if you want to adopt any of those recommendations and go out and forward a design or look more closely at it, keep the ball rolling, basically.
I'm not sure that, I wasn't on the commission at that time. Maybe you
Right.
could forward that out. Kathy, do you have that? Sorry. I don't
Terry,
recall.
let me see if Terry
Betty,
can
are you
help.
talking about the AMS report, the last one? I'd be happy to send it to you, or it's on our website, too.
Oh, okay, okay.
So what about this decision on both end of the Oregon Trail and Ermitanger House in 2011?
I'll leave them there.
Yeah.
Okay, and then going up a couple of boxes to the one we skipped, the priority list for all facility assets and needs. And the note here is that it also obviously has some implications for the Urban Renewal Commission as well as the City Commission, is not a major study of all facilities, but just what it says, a list that indicates what the assets are, what the needs are, and what the priorities are. Rocky?
I guess the other things that aren't on here that I'm concerned about are other empty buildings that we aren't utilizing or have a plan for. One comes to mind is the railroad depot. We need to at least have some discussion about, well, it was on this matrix, it didn't get onto this. We at least need to have some discussion of what we're going to do with that building, or lease it out, or whatever, because that's a possible, some possible revenue that we could bring in if we can put something in there temporarily, or I don't know. The other one that...
Before you go on, so let me just see, Ed's nodding with that.
Let me ask a question. Is there any urban renewal money is in that, isn't that? Is there urban renewal money in that station?
Yes.
So,
And I would like to add to that, because we're just about to get our certificate of occupancy. We're working on a few details. And so at that point, we definitely want to bring it to the commission as to what you want us to do with this building now.
Cool, because I didn't know what would. Great.
And Rocky, I think the reason it's not on the list with Ermitanger is because it's one of those things we know we're doing anyway.
Yeah, it's kind of in process.
Almost to fall down
Okay.
kind of thing, so it had to be on here.
let's get it on there. We're doing it and get it on there.
Okay.
Well, I think
Well, yeah,
we also had we were kind of encompassing it with the priority list for all facility assets. That's kind of where we were fitting it in, because it isn't an active thing above and beyond what we're doing.
And I guess in addition to that, I'll ask about community development lease. If that's something we're still, because about maybe a year ago, we talked about what would be the possibility of breaking that lease early, et cetera. We never heard back on that. And so I don't know if we're even, with where we're at financially, I'd hate to see us continue to spend probably the most expensive rent in the city if we're not doing well in that department in terms of bringing money in.
Which is this, I'm sorry?
Planning and community.
Yeah, I'd concur with that, and I'd add as a justification for reconsidering that lease, the excess we're paying in rent on that building is money that could be going, to
Right.
saving staff in the department.
Right.
So I would support Rocky's
So I
idea
hope it
very
hasn't
highly.
got off the list. I hope
So
it's
you
something.
put
It's
that
on the
off
radar.
General priority
Okay.
list and make sure that it's singled out.
I would say, I would put it on
It's on the radar?
Well, is it true that that the city had discussions, or there was some concept or plan that when Public Works finally moved?
Yeah, that was
Yeah.
part of why it was
CD
on
would come
hold.
down
Yeah.
here?
In
Is that-
fact,
Right.
our space down here was designed for community development.
And the part that keeps tripping us up is that there's language in the lease agreement that talks about consolidating all administrative services into a new city hall facility. So we can certainly go through it with the attorneys again. They did raise some concerns, but yeah, that's certainly something we can discuss.
But we need to know where you're going to go.
Well, that's the other part of it, is where do we go?
The van down by the river.
So, I mean, even if I could break it,
I think
You want to tell Tony where to go?
remember, this is live.
I want to say
chocolate,
how we said where Tony was going to go. The intent was having Public Works temporarily in here until the Public Works facility got built, and at that time planning to move it here. But we're not going to build Public Works within next year, and so we've got to look at some better, longer-term things for your situation, even if they're temporary.
We better be careful about that temporary. That can be 20 years.
It's so small. We tried, believe me, we're looking everywhere.
So I asked, are we ready to move on from facilities?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So goal 4. I want to say, go
Did I
ahead,
miss
Dave.
something on the library? We're talking about, maybe I was out of the room, talking about the vote.
Yeah, we didn't have the vote concept when we were at the retreat.
So
Pretty much
Good enough
clear,
now?
right? All the attorneys that we've talked to, that it does require a vote, so.
Well, if you look at carefully at that goal, it says identify and agree on a site. We can do that without a vote. Acquire may take a vote depending on the
Yeah.
price.
Yeah.
So we're going to pursue this, and then but I think Dave's identified it. I mean, that number 57 in the charter means real pain in the neck for us, but
Yeah.
we're probably going to have to go to a vote to actually incur the debt to build it, or save our money until we can have enough.
Never mind.
Yeah, never mind that. Never mind, I didn't say
Okay,
that.
we'll be going to the voters.
Moving on.
Okay, so under Goal 4, we talked about South End concept planning process. Last time, we had a pretty extensive discussion of heritage review and didn't come to any real closure, except that it was important to everybody, that it was something everyone would like to see. The closest we came was under Goal 5, citizen participation, creating an advisory committee, but also the concept that there are lots of people working on this and that the city ought to be a hub that kind of pulls those spokes together. But we did not come to any sense of closure about what that means in terms of action in 2011.
Well, one thing that's going on now is looking at the local inventory for other houses to be included in the local inventory of historic houses. So we actually have a component of this that's involved, I think. Depending on what you call heritage review, but I would think that was part of it.
Part of the heritage review was also, as I recall, was everyone was discussing about we've got all these separate entities and no centralized.
Yeah.
Were we going to take that role on or not?
Right. Or, helping in coordination, or, yeah.
Yeah.
And I think two other sort of things that came up in that discussion were that heritage is sort of a lens that we look at everything else through, and also is there a connection between heritage and economic development. So actually, that's obviously not a discussion we're going to be able to complete here. If we have time, let's at least have a little bit of that discussion this evening, but let's move on for now. And we're going to skip Goal 5 for the moment because we want to talk about citizen participation in the context of everything. So on to Goal 6, 2014 water rate rollback. Ooh, it just says 2012 Terry, remind me what that meant?
Well, Nancy, I think, didn't you say we needed to go out for the vote in 2012?
If we determined that we need a charter amendment, the city attorney was recommending that we go for the May 2012 election.
Okay.
And Nancy, you said if, but in my recollection of its memo is that you lose your bid.
That's right, but we also need to do some financial analysis first, and we need to have a good understanding of what services we will not be able to provide.
So we have the unfortunate legal thing. But we have that, so we just need to do our analysis, and that could be done in preparation with an idea looking at 05-12.
So 2011, the analysis should be really done if we're going to go for a May election.
I think what's going to be important too is assemble a citizen task force to look at it with the city commission and public works, so that there's an ability to educate the voters about the issues, so they can vote with plenty of information.
So Nancy, from a capacity standpoint, I know that Ed's capacity is limited by only how much we can afford to pay him. It seems like your capacity is limited on how much staff you have. Do you think you have the staff to get this financial analysis? Are you able to do that within your capacity?
Yeah, we have to. I think
within that time frame.
It's not a
That's
choice.
what
I
I'm
don't.
talking about, within that time frame.
Yes.
I presume David Wimmer is part of your staff in that case.
We know what the revenue is.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, there's the story you have to tell, though.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
Yeah.
But what if we don't?
People don't know what we spend money on in the water. I mean,
Okay.
I think a lot of information needs to be available.
So are we saying then 2011 will be the financial analysis and the formation of the citizen task force and subsequent conversations in that task force? And then May 2012 will be the election?
That's our current approach. And
I thought there was consensus on this last time as well.
And we may hire a consultant to help with some of the analysis and presentation, because part of it is, we need to be careful that we're not lobbying, what's the word? Campaigning?
Well, until they actually put it on the agenda. Until they refer it to the ballot, it's preparation. It's not. You're not advocating for it because there's nothing there.
Right, okay.
But once they vote to refer it, then we have how to do it.
Fire District Annexation Pledge we've talked about. Is there further clarification that you need?
I think the notion of having no new programs, I think that in the context of the various programs that we have, I think we can look at, if we have the monies and so forth, to look at expansions in those programs. I mean, the needs maintenance includes serving the whole community.
And based on Doug's point, I want to ask, are we clear that no new programs doesn't prohibit the expansion of existing programs? Is that, do we have a consensus on that point?
I think Nancy has actually got the paragraph there, and maybe this is the time to read it,
This is the explanatory statement on the fire annexation from 2007 election, and there's, among other things on this statement, it says the cost of annexing to the fire district would not add new city services or programs, but would allow maintenance of all city services at current service levels. That's really all it says about that.
Current.
Allow maintenance of city services at current service levels. It leaves it open for a lot of interpretation.
Yeah. So, Betty, you want to say a word about that?
Nope. Thank you. I'm good. Thank you, Joe.
Jim,
Clear as mud.
Training, we know
Clear
that
mud.
reasonable minds can differ. We still get down to that foundation of what
Yeah.
the perception is.
I would like to say that, current has changed a lot since that promise was made. Technology is certainly
We have
advanced.
40 officers.
Yeah. And so are we talking current in that year or current?
Well, it's open to debate. You can flip it around any way you want to.
Current depends where you are in the river.
Yep.
William, you want to say something briefly?
If I may, please, because I was pretty intimately involved in this whole annexation thing. My suspicion is that on? Yes. My suspicion is that the citizens who took real stock in the annexation pledge were more concerned about the possible increase of taxes than additional programs. However, the way it reads is it says there will be no additional programs. I would contend that citizens wouldn't care if we added programs as long as it didn't come out of their pocket. I'm just saying I think the pledge is exceedingly vague.
Thanks. Doug?
We always had, for example, a citizen involvement program. It got reduced dramatically, and it was minimal at this point this actually came before us, but the program was there. And if you've got more neighborhood associations are now being reestablished and so forth, that's still part of the historical neighborhood. I don't know that we're getting a neighborhood association that historically didn't exist before. And I think if you look at it in that broad context, the need for that service is at a different point in the river in terms of what current is.
And same for the committees, too. Arts Commission.
Yeah.
I mean, those all were in existence.
And that's a perfect segue, because we're going to talk about those in just a couple of minutes. Nancy?
2 months after the election, the commission had its retreat, and they discussed what is maintenance of services at quite an extent here. But there's just a couple bullet points of summary of that. Do you want to hear it?
Sure. Of course we do.
The plan has flexibility within certain limits, targets specific needs, adjust to changing community needs, approach funding special needs such as the library facility. Department savings grants may target new resources for needs, balances between deficiency and reserves, sale lower bonds 99 cents, save money short term. The one that stands out to me is adjusting to changing community needs.
So heads are nodding. There seems to be some sense of the commission. So I'm going to move on. Relationship with Clackamas County, and there are lots of ideas that aren't sort of listed here. They are captured in the notes. Prepare position paper on Oregon City status in the county and schedule a joint work session with the City Commission and County Commission. And then I think we've talked about parks maintenance utility fee, begin 18-month process of exploration. And the rest of that is not necessary, but a strong statement, at least from Doug, that he felt that it should go to a vote. So let's talk about citizen participation, and what we wanted to do is sort of get that whole, list for the year, and then think about how do we effectively involve citizens in all of those pieces. I want to remind you we are going to go to the list of other possible candidates for being on the priorities. The one thing that is already on here is the idea of revitalizing advisory committees for heritage, natural resources, arts. And I just want to ask you sort of to spend a few minutes talking about what are your expectations for advisory committees. When you work with advisory committees, I want to say it's very important to be clear with them about what your expectations are, because having different expectations leads to the possibility of misunderstanding, resentments, and so I think the two things, maybe three things that are really clear. One is having a very clear charge, making your expectations clear to them, providing them with the support that they need to be effective to do logistics, notes, liaison with staff and commission. And then I think they're all bodies that require public notices, so there's that whole dimension as well. Doug?
I'll just come to the Natural Resource Committee because actually I was the one that asked for and got the creation of that when I was on the commission earlier. It imploded, and I think part of the reason it imploded was that they were recommending things that ultimately would require code change. I think part of the process is a longer process than putting the recommendations out there. I think most of the recommendation the Natural Resource Committee made was encompassed ultimately in the code changes that occurred. I don't know that it was all of it, but a great deal of it was from the input from the Natural Resource Committee. I think the Natural Resource Committee could function differently. When there's need for code changes, they could look at it, but to have area or project-specific areas that they address, and Jim Nocita suggested, and I agree with him, that the code be one of those. So I think the Natural Resource Committee could be something of an ad hoc committee that when there are specific natural resource areas we want to take a look at it, we can pull individuals together. It may not always be the same individuals, depending on the expertise that we would want. But I do think that need is there. And that was my comment there.
Terry?
I think at one point last year in the retreat, there was a discussion about having the Planning Commission serve as the Natural Resource Committee.
Yeah,
I didn't know if that was something that you wanted to consider.
I think you're looking for a level of expertise that is not necessarily encompassed in the members of the Planning Commission. Perhaps it could be constituted as some kind of a subcommittee of it, but I think you need to bring in different expertise.
Wouldn't we want to do that through consultants, or are we really going to wait and hold positions for volunteers with that expertise?
Consultants are. I think you have to have. I think you have to have, like almost in anything else, public participation in the process. I think it's very difficult to frame how a given natural resource may be accommodated and utilized and so forth unless you have public input in terms of what the community interests and needs are.
So are we more looking for a site-specific project and community visioning input, or is that different than just a group of selected folks who then make all those decisions?
Well, I would say site-specific. Therefore, you have stakeholders in the site. And we come up with the Cove as, I think, the best example.
And I just want to point out that this sort of appears on here twice, because under Goal 1, it says explore the creation of the Cove Habitat Task Force, objectives, planning, budgeting, and then that sort of morphed into Natural Resources Advisory Committee under Goal 5.
Kind of 1 and 2. I mean, it's all the same.
I think so, too.
It's
Jim,
all the same.
I know you've got the strong interest in this area, too.
I think I suggested at the retreat specifically that I thought that, because this had come up when we talked about the Cove last year, and since that discussion, I've agreed with it that the Cove Habitat Task Force and the Natural Resources Committee should essentially be one and the same group. Because it almost would be duplicative to create two groups. I mean, good expertise only goes so far. And since we already have the Natural Resources Committee enabled by city code, city ordinance, and it needs to be reconstituted, I think it's a fairly easy, at least logistically thing, as far as staffing and funding. That's obviously what we have to discuss. But I would be in favor of reconstituting the Natural Resources Committee and having the Cove habitat question be its first, referral from the commission.
I would suggest, and it comes back to Tony's point, that rather than initially have a staff person there, you may want to have a staff person to sit in on it, but that you actually, site-specific, has specific concerns there, that you might bring in a consultant to be the person that, coordinates the coordinates the effort as opposed to assigning one of your staff. I think it was somewhat problematic to have a staff person there that felt, don't take this as an insult, it's not intended to be that way, but to work within the constraints of the existing code and so forth. I think you have to have a more enabling individual there to actually deal with a stakeholder group, and that could form the recommendations that ultimately come to the planning commission, which probably is what's going to happen in the process.
I guess just so I can understand, like when we do a concept plan, we hire a consultant who does the work and puts together harnesses the ideas of the group.
Yeah.
Is that what I'm hearing, or are you hearing that the committee are the experts?
The committee will have some experts there, but there would also be stakeholders there.
Because I want to make sure that I think one of the failures of the Natural Resource Committee was that it was stacked, and it didn't have a true representation of the community and the business interests, and some of the products that came out of that. Those were some of the concerns. So I think we need to make sure we got a wide.
Yeah.
All the stakeholders are represented, and that it's not just one group.
Say what their biased are.
Tony, can you explain what you mean by the word stacked?
I think what was lacking from the Natural Resource Committee was sufficient representation from the home builders, the development community, the downtown businesses, and so that the code that came out of that, and some of the recommendations weren't met with. I think they could have been done better, and you probably had much more consensus on a good product coming out of what Natural Resources Committee has done historically. I think that there were voices in the community who are going to be impacted by what that group came up with that were never heard or even consulted.
I would suggest a project-specific thing would have less of that. I mean, if we're talking about the code, I would think there would be representation from Oregon City Shopping Center. I would think the CIC would want to have representation there. So I think when it becomes area Pacific, it becomes far easier to talk about stakeholders than it does when you're talking about everything in the
board,
city.
yeah, with everything on the table.
Yeah.
And my repeated hiccup on all of this is capacity. Either staff or consultant is going to require capacity. How does Nancy?
Well, something to add for the capacity point is that we weren't able to do the cove dredging project last year because we didn't have money for it. The county wasn't able to contribute, and that's something that's been a high priority for this community. And we'd want to consider. I mean, they're kind of talking about we're in the same area. We're in the cove enhancement, that kind of natural resources stuff down at the mouth of the river. And I think they're kind of competing for resources, quite frankly, financial resources, in my mind, because you may be able to do both, which would be great. But just so keep in mind, let's not forget about the dredging project.
Does that permit have a date?
It can continually be renewed.
Okay.
But it's still, the river's not getting any better. I mean, actually the project will grow in time. The volume of removal will increase. So anyway, I just wanted to remind the commission that there's a competing resource need there.
Well, yeah, but I think it's part of it. I mean, we're looking always at the dredging aspect, which probably has to come. Are there things that would work that could happen upstream that could reduce that gravel load at that particular site? I don't know.
Well, it's not going to remove it.
No. Did I say remove it, or did I say reduce it?
No, but just,
no,
it seems like it would be fairly significant to, I'm not saying we can't abandon the dredging plan, but I just want to remind you that that's an unfunded project.
No, but it may go up in priority in terms of the overall city, but depending on what this task force recommends and how it's approached. So you got the right consultant.
Say a few words. Thank you. If I could use a microphone. Okay. Paul Edgar. The Natural Resources Committee is kind of almost mandated within the current city code for review and referral on building permits, on a lot of the planning process. And
just like the Parks and Rec Committee, it should be completely independent. It should not be part of site-specific. It should be looking as a group that looks at the environmental well-being of all process independently, not across the board. We need somebody thinking about, in a balanced way, the environment, and not married to the chamber or married to the downtown business or to builders. But this is an environmentally a conscience of our city, and if it's not being addressed independently, then we are turning our back, and I think that's wrong.
Thank you.
But I think it has to be a broad spectrum of people, because otherwise it's just going to go one-sided. It's going to go left or right, up or down. It's not going to be a balanced end result that you're looking for.
Tony, do you have the staff to staff? I mean I'm just thinking about this, and I don't want to compare it to CHP, but I'm wondering about what happened before with the committee, because it sounded like a really committed group of people who passionately cared and had some expertise, and yet it still didn't work. So I just want to, if that becomes one of the priorities, I'm real concerned.
I got a little bit of trouble here because we're basically making inferences and conclusions about why the Natural Resources Committee imploded without hearing from those members, former members of the Natural Resources Committee.
No, I did hear from them.
So I would caution everybody a lot to make inferences and about why they imploded. The story that I've heard from them, or some of them, differs from what I've heard in this room, and I would rather that we hear from them about their own experiences.
If we're going to try to dissect the past, you're absolutely right.
Yes.
We're talking about the future.
Yeah.
What do you want to do? And again, both in terms of direction and in terms of resources. You want to?
Do I want to add?
No. I think William has a brief word.
Excuse me. The brief word is, and I'm sure that all the assembled here are aware of a concept called triple bottom line. And I'm not going to talk about all three of those, about the economic and the social and the spiritual bottom line. But I would want to make sure, so let's take the spiritual off the list, but talking about the Natural Resource Committee, which I would be a strong supporter for, I would want to make sure that we're looking at least the economic as well as the environmental issues. So, and insofar as, broad spectrum is one thing, but I would want to say that is evenly balanced between concepts of the environment as well as the economy.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to dissent a little bit from that, and here's why. When you look at the city as a whole, you have an economic development manager, you have an urban renewal commission, you have all kinds of fora and venues for varying points of view, the planning commission, for issues of economic development and other values to be represented in voices to the city commission. I think I probably agree with Paul on this point. I don't think it's a bad thing, Tony, that this Natural Resources Committee be staffed and have people on the commission that are natural resources specialists, technically and perhaps spiritually as well. Because I think that voice is one voice amongst all of the other institutional voices in the city to, have a holistic view come to the city commission for the decision or to the planning commission. Mm-hmm. I don't think that that we need to, within the Natural Resources Committee itself, have to have that kind of balance, because I think the balance is a citywide balance, and I prefer to have, an articulated voice for ecology and natural resources coming from a committee devoted to natural resources.
Well, the independence I see comes from having a consultant that deals with that. If we're dealing with the Cove, I think we have to have the input from anybody that's impacted by the Cove. And that's why I was saying you should have representation from the Oregon City Shopping Center, probably from Tri-City Sewers, too. I mean, it seems to me that any of the adjacent property owners have to be part of that discussion. I fully anticipate there are going to be natural resource expertise on there, but I think I would prefer to have the dialogue and debate among that group as opposed to have something comprised strictly of natural resource experts coming in at one point and then having I'll put it as a confrontation between the development committee. I think if it's done at the committee level internally, it's going to be far more productive than to have two entities coming up with two different ways of viewing it and have a plan over here and some concepts over here that appear to be in complete conflict with each other when I don't think it needs to happen.
Betty?
So I guess what's the bottom line? Where do we go from here? We can debate this.
Well, I think we need to reestablish our Natural Resource Committee, and I think we can extend this debate into part of the your own.
Terry?
I have two very simple questions. How do you, as a commission, define your expectation for what that committee is to do? What are you expecting from them? And how and who do you see is going to facilitate pulling that group together of experts?
And if I can just respond, I mean, I agree, Jim. You know, if this commission decides that they want a citizen group that's only that they have natural resource expertise or they work in the field, so be it. We will put that committee together. But just in the work that we've done in putting together concept plans, writing code, the more folks from divergent views that you can get in the same room talking about an issue creates a much, much better product. And it reduces the confrontation down the line, whether that be in front of the Planning Commission or the City Commission. To say that home builders aren't worried about their environment, it's not.
So I want to.
They're a stakeholder.
I want to ask Betty's question because this is an important discussion, obviously, and note that this is only one of 3 advisory committees that we talked about. Where do we go from here? How do you make this decision? And strengthen relationships,
Yes.
right? That was the goal.
Yes.
Make the best decision, strengthen relationship.
Well, I actually, the Natural Resources Committee is already described in ordinance. To me, it's just a question of appointing the members to it, and the mayor has that power of appointment. So it seems to me, and rather simply, that the mayor take a leadership role to appoint the members to it.
I want to just say a quick comment, and I should have brought up my little card before I said this, but but if you think that's all it takes to have a successful committee, I'm going to say that you're wrong.
Well,
To have a successful committee takes a lot of organization and work other than just appointing the members.
So, Nancy, let me ask you a different question. You're going to create a task force, you said, for this water rate thing.
Yes.
So talk about what you're going to put into that to create that task force.
Oh, gosh. Well, we get some sort of sense of who we believe are people that are interested in the topic, customers of the water district, and propose a list of people and ask them if they're interested in participating, get the city commission's blessing, work with the city manager up front on it. And this would be a temporary task force for limited duration. And then it would be organized, managed through our staff, making the meetings, organizing the meetings, invitations, scheduling, minutes, et cetera.
Thank you. Doug, did you want to?
Thanks, Jim, for giving me all the power I need.
I mean, I'm not.
Okay, I think that's a discussion we can have, but in our budget process, we're going to go through a budget process. I think that's the point where we can talk about it, whether we can earmark 25,000 to a consultant or whatever, we can have that dialogue at the Budget Committee level and to actually form a line item in the process. And
anything's possible at a budget hearing, but let me just say this for us. If we know that that is a priority of yours, or you can write this priority to say, direct the city manager to look for resources that could fund this at a certain level, then I can try to do that through the budget process. But doing that kind of thing on the floor during the budget hearings is extremely difficult, because by that time it's like a sweater, and if you pull one,
you want the
that.
hand raised right here in terms of whether this should be a high priority.
Well, I'm really concerned about the capacity that Tony has, because we have a number of things on here. But I mean, Jim, I'll just say I've been called the tree-hugging city manager in other cities where I work. So he made a speech there, and I'm like, yeah, So it needs a voice, a focus. I feel like our commission actually is focused on this already, and you guys don't call yourself the Natural Resource City Commission. So good for us. We're focused. But it would be really a nice thing to have. I'm concerned about the reality check for Tony's department and whether we can do it. I just don't want to do it if we can't do it well. I'm more worried about doing it half, well, you fill in that blank, half whatever, than I am in doing it. And I'd just rather do it right or not do it. That's what I'm worried about.
Let me make a comment here. We get kind of focused on Tony's department. That's because that's where it was staffed from before. You hire a consultant, I don't think it has to be that department specific. I mean, she's talking about the dredging. She's public works. She's not Tony's department.
Absolutely.
And so I don't think it really has to be under planning. Okay?
No, I'm just worried about any capacity. I'm not saying we don't.
Well, I'm suggesting then that we're going to work with finding a amount of money. I threw out 25,000 to actually have a consultant. Yeah, we're talking about the Cove project. Yeah. I mean, whether this is going to take more than a year and we've got to delegate another 25,000 next year, I can't say that at this point.
That was very generous of you, Dr. Trump.
Yeah.
I appreciate that.
I'm talking about the reality. I'm talking about the reality. I'm talking about the reality of bringing in a good professional consultant. I don't know that you're going to do it for much less than that.
You're not going to do it well. It almost feels like we need to have a work session just about this.
That's right.
Just about this one topic to see, and what we could do is that we could put on our priorities, have a work session or two or more about this, because I would like to come forward. This meaning the idea of a natural resources committee / habitat for the Cove.
So it sounds like it's more for the
one thing we don't have, and I went down there on a walking tour with Doug, and I think Paul, some other people were there, and it was mentioned to me, gosh, wouldn't it be nice if we had a master plan for the Cove? And I think that might have been the night you scared, at least me, when you talked about it turning into a mud flat and that sort of thing. And it made me realize we don't have a master plan really for the resource, for the ecosystem. And so when I was talking to Nancy, she quickly said, well, we're talking about $150,000 probably for that kind of a project. And so I just want to be more realistic about what your expectations are and what our
this irritated me at that meeting no end, because we got cold water. Personally, I think we had cold water thrown by the staff by coming up with this amount of money, and they were talking about a full-time staff member. I don't think that's where we're at in terms of pulling this group together to begin having discussions. There might be a point where we have to bring in somebody to deal with some of these issues on a full-time basis, but that's not at the beginning of the process.
Yeah. Wow. I also think maybe.
I don't think I was the only one irritated at that meeting.
Has it been studied to death, or do I just need to learn more? I'm worried about the resources.
To just kind of move this forward, I would be willing to talk to some colleagues of mine to just chat about what do you think we could do? What kind of a work scope would you think it would be? What it would take to manage a committee for 6-9 months to focus on the habitat at the Cove. And then I could come back to a work session. I mean,
I think this is good, but I would like to see a lot of most of this fleshed out before the next fiscal year begins.
I mean, I'm thinking coming back in a couple
Since Nancy's making a commitment, I'm going to try to commit to something here as well. is that if you'll do that, what I can do is, when we look at our capital budget, I think we probably, because of the fire annexation, we've been able to put, as we would say, throw money into capital projects that we wouldn't have had before. So we can look at that capital budget and see if we can earmark some money.
Out of the general fund capital.
Sort of a just in case. Because if we're not going to add position, we might have some money for a project like that. So let me see if I can do that. I'll commit to trying to find some of that money for that, just in case Nancy comes back with something that looks like we can make headway. And then we won't be...
No. It comes back with something so that we can make
Yes,
headway.
so we can make it. Because
So we can keep
see, I
moving
still,
forward.
when we get out of this goal thing, I mean, we're already starting our budget process, so I really want to know that I'm writing a budget that when it comes before you, you feel like you can approve it because it's got the right stuff in it. And I don't get the right stuff unless I get some direction here.
That's
so,
fine.
Thanks.
But the answer is the Natural Resource Committee is important for this next year, for this current, for goals.
And it could be more of a task force.
So Rocky's nodding his head, Jim is, Kathy is, Betty, you want to?
Not important to me. No.
Okay. So we're about to move on.
Yes.
But I want to do, at some risk here, since this is a different setting, I want to go back to where we were a couple of weeks ago, and remember we had, considerable discussion of working together effectively and specific techniques, and I don't know if
I have
all
my
of...
cards.
So here's our cards,
Yes.
and we've got...
Get my card.
And I just want to ask for feedback to one another, to ourselves. How are we doing? What could we do better?
Good
I
question.
mean, that one got a little bit warm.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
We've
Press.
got to have some passion.
We have trouble with the 45 seconds.
It's like the referees for the World Cup.
We didn't have anybody timing.
No, so
Nobody was timing us, saying 45 seconds.
so with that, we're actually about to move on to another discussion or two, and we can learn from what we just did and apply it. So, what did you do well? What did you do? No, not quite as well as you might have.
I think they look for agreement. So people were searching for where...
I mean, I think there's concerns with cost, and I understand that. But I think you've got sufficient number of commissioners here that feel this is an important area, and we do set the goals. And ultimately, I mean, we've gotten the reaction from the staff, and we've made certain recommendations. It sounds to me like our city manager is going to sit down with Nancy, probably Tony as well, to talk about how we identify funds to do this and how we go about it. It's going to come back to us. So I think we've identified a process, even though we're a little excited about
Okay,
it.
but so we got to a good
Where we
place in
wanted
the
to
end.
go.
I think so.
What about the process getting there? Could we have done anything better in the process getting there?
Seemed like it was all over the map.
Uh-huh.
Redid a lot of history.
I would suggest it wasn't all over the map. It was confined to the cove.
Okay, thank you.
As staff, I still feel like there are unclear expectations of what you want to see come out of it. I know that you want the committee formed, but I'm not sure.
Here's the issue as far as I'm concerned. You're asking for us to define the major issues. That, I think, is the responsibility of the committee, of the task force, of whatever you want to call it, that we're putting together. That's their responsibility. You're asking us to set forward all the issues are when that is something that really this body should be doing. I mean, we have certain, we've already got it. Dredging is part of it. Jim's brought up the concern of whether that, we'll call it a peninsula for want of a better word, whether that peninsula is going to be there over a long period of time. I mean, I think there's certain major issues that we've already put forward that ought to be looked at.
So, Doug, I'm going to interrupt and say we're not going to discuss
Yeah.
the Cove right now. We're going to discuss how we discuss, because I want to be really clear. There's going to be much more heated issues in front of you regularly.
Mm-hmm.
This was a fine example because it was heated enough and not so heated, not superheated, that it allows you to look at it. What could we do better? What could we do different?
Better is really not assign the assumption is that we're going to have all of the issues defined before this committee comes forward. I don't think that's going to be the case. I think the committee itself is going to identify what some of those issues are.
I'm talking about the process
Yeah.
we just had for the last 20 minutes.
Could we do better?
Yeah.
we do better?
How
Well, I
could
guess,
we
I
do
don't know,
better?
I guess I'm not supposed to give my personal opinion sometimes about what I viewed going wrong with previous commissions. I felt like Jim and I had a little bit of a disagreement there. I'm not sure if I could have done that a little better, or, I was just trying to give an example of what I saw from the staff level of why things broke down. It wasn't meant to be an attack on the previous commission or who their members were. I should have clarified that. Nope, I'm done.
I'd like to suggest also that possibly before we come back to discuss these issues, that maybe we take assignments and do some research on different ideas that are out here, and then come back ourselves with information.
Okay. So we've got two more here that we could go into now, or we could have little assignments. One is heritage, the other is arts. Would you like to take an assignment?
No, I like to give assignments.
That's Rocky, he's a teacher.
So that
Your arts,
suggestion
your
is
heritage,
that
right?
we could prepare in advance for some of these. Other suggestions for what we can do, and we'll come back to that. Other thoughts about what we could do differently?
guys
About
got
s-
anything?
Go ahead. Betty, were you gonna-
No, I was just going to say, just not rehashing and going over and
I
over.
think that's right.
Mm-hmm.
State your case and move on.
State your case and move on.
Yeah.
I
And then
think
go
we're-
back and clarify questions.
I think we were getting into a little too much nitty-gritty. I mean, we weren't focusing on what's the goal. We were trying to figure out all the solutions to all the issues, and going too far into it, things that will be done as part of the
That's right.
achievement of the goal.
Yeah.
I couldn't have said it better.
And I guess we just push because there are big time commitment and financial commitment differences from what we see. That's why our red flags are going up.
Yeah.
And when we say habitat, and then we talk about bank stabilization, and we talk about dredging, and then hydrology, we're just trying to probe and get an idea of what the scope is. And we understand that you don't think we're going to, that's what we're intended to do tonight.
What I don't want to leave the impression is this is an anti-development process. I see this as something we deal with, whether development occurs there or not. And right now, we've got a development agreement, but I think all of the Cove project really hinged upon the Cove itself being an important area that we're going to have recreation on, that has natural habitat on. I mean, all those things are important to the development of the Cove.
And we're now moving away from the Cove, and I want to ask
That's right.
I like the room layout. I like
this.
Yes, I think
well,
yes.
So let me ask you a couple of other specific questions about logistics. What about having staff and commissioners interspersed and conversing
I think it's
freely?
great, and it
I think
works.
it's helpful, except for I can't, no, it's helpful. It's okay.
She wanted to kick
I don't
Rocky,
like being
but I'm in a position where I
She's
can do
just
it.
throwing candy at me instead of hitting me, that's fine.
And missing.
We didn't, I don't
Okay.
think we considered you when we had the setup here, because we had staff, commissioner, commissioner, and you messed us up.
Oh, well, I tried to sit there, and you moved me out.
Well,
What about?
Didn't work very well there.
We've
5 commissioners, 11 staff.
we've also allowed people in the audience
Yes,
to speak.
I think that's important.
That's important too. And I want to say to all of you that I really appreciate that you've kept your remarks very brief and sort of made your point and then backed off. So we're going to talk about the rest of citizen participation, and starting with Advisory Committee for Heritage, Advisory Committee for Arts, and I want to come back to Kathy's suggestion. Would it make sense for someone or someones to prepare rather than jumping into those?
Rocky, you're in charge.
Is there consensus?
I think both on the arch and the heritage aspects, although we have all some interest in it. I think in both of those, Commissioner Smith is a person that is involved in all of those areas in various aspects, and I would suggest maybe that he does come back with specific recommendations as how this might happen. And even though I might make appointments, I'll listen to you very carefully.
A list of committees?
Yeah.
And man,
That's a lot.
Let's see
And
it.
then I have the inactive committees,
Yeah.
Yes.
that's what
which you already have the names.
Yep.
And are there enough of these for everybody? Oh, they're going around.
Antique Aviation Committee. No, I'm just kidding.
I wouldn't be surprised.
Could I interject on one of those? And that's a Heritage Committee. Every week or two, it seems like I see a new group under a new name that's popping up all over the place. And, I mean, it's not, I'm not trying to go back to what was viewed at one time in terms of how the Heritage Partners were to operate. I thought that was going to be an umbrella group, and it went a very different direction. And I think whatever we do here, I think it ought to be really an umbrella group that encompasses so many different interests. You've got the...
I'm going to hold you off, Doug, because you're getting into talking about what
Specific.
we said that Rocky was going to prepare for. And I want to ask...
I just want to give input on that one thing. I don't know if you agree with me, but it seems we've got a lot of diverse groups out there.
Quite honestly, I mean, I haven't wrapped my brain around it completely, but I think my thoughts are more along what you're talking about. The Arts Commission haven't thought about. So sorry about that. So I see it basically being a bringing of all those heritage groups together. Representatives from each of the heritage groups that meet occasionally as a way to coordinate things, but I don't necessarily see that right now being a hugely city run thing. We talked about this a little bit actually at the Oregon City Tourism Council meeting that we just had last week. I'll probably talk more about it at the next City Commission meeting probably. I didn't speak about it Wednesday night because we all wanted to kind of go home after that meeting because it went so late. But our former mayor, Alice Norris, was at our last Oregon City Tourism Council meeting. We talked about the past of what that committee was, how it evolved, what it was put together for, how it's basically that group was just to deal with the TAP money from the county. I won't get into all the specifics of it, but since the county funding is coming in a different way for tourism, that group didn't really need to exist. So there's other groups within the city that have kind of assembled that will almost maybe take the place of that committee. So we've talked about it, but it's all, very beginning stages, and I have a little bit to share from that, and I consolidate that, and I can bring that to the commission,
So let me ask a couple of questions. One is, we're asking Rocky to look at both arts and heritage and come in with thoughts on both.
I think that's a really big job.
I think it's a big job, so...
Because I was in a meeting a couple weeks ago where I had simply asked the question of how many heritage groups existed, and the people at the table who belonged to a lot of them couldn't tell me.
Well, no, I can tell you, but it'd take me 10 minutes.
So...
Rocky, do you want some help? I'll help you.
Okay, so it sounds like Betty and Rocky are going to work on heritage together, and I think that means sort of what would it look like, what resources are required, what would its specific charge be from the commission.
Okay.
What about arts? We've asked him to do arts too. Now I think it's a similar charge to him.
Well, I can help with arts too. I mean, I can tell you, art is in the eye of the beholder. You may not want my eyes on it. I'll tell you that quite honestly. But hey, you know, I'll help out organizing it.
Okay.
Sure. I'm
Great.
game.
So,
I was going to add that art is an area that I'm interested in too,
Oh,
and
yeah.
so if there was some committee that I was going to sign up for, that would be one that I would be just interested in because I have a.
So would it be you and Rocky and I'd be out the hook?
no, I think it's
you.
it sounds like it's the three of you.
I'm just suggesting that there could be some staff support there.
Sounds like it might be the three of you.
Could I draw back and just ask, and just strictly volunteer, if there's anybody else that interested in heritage?
Pardon me?
Heritage.
Heritage.
You're looking at me.
And I don't want to get hung up on the terminology, but these could be just study groups until you've got enough information. When we say committee, I know we're all thinking, ordinance and then staffing and money and all that. But it could be just interest groups, study groups.
Yeah.
So let me ask the question that Doug did. Anyone on staff interested in helping Rocky and Betty with heritage?
Well, I think between, Scott
You're
oversees
kind of
the
already-
facilities, but
Mhm.
I've been involved with Rocky on two of the projects now and with Doug, and so kind of have the history in it. Certainly am able to do that.
Great.
Oh, yeah. That's
As long as you
that's
want me
fine,
to.
too.
I mean,
So,
it's up to you.
So we're still going to do three more things, and we won't go for that much longer. One is take a look at this list of boards and commissions, and is there a task implied here? And I don't have an agenda here. I just want to say you've got this list in front of you. Does it suggest anything to anybody?
Says we have a long list. It's very long.
For a little city our size, it is a long list.
Based on
I
my
would-
experience in other cities, it is, the list you have is lengthy. It shows a lot of citizen involvement and outreach, which I think is a healthy and a good thing. But it is quite a long list there are cities probably that even have a longer list than that.
You got it.
Size, but-
Portland.
I mean, you've got a group that is really a self-forming group that operates, the Tadashina Sister Committee. I don't think the mayor appoints anybody anymore. I mean, you've got a group of people that are interested in that. It's got the city's blessing because we have a sister city.
Right.
But I don't know that this is an issue. I don't think there's much in the way of city resources that go into this, unless somebody wants to correct me.
Oh, you're right. This
And-
actually came up at the, because John Salisbury was at the Oregon City Tourism Council meeting. So that discussion, we kind of with that group have had the discussion, what would this look like at the city level in terms of committee or whatever. And having it operate in much the same way as the Sister City Committee was one thing that we talked about. So it could be something that really wouldn't even, be, well, in fact, actually, our former mayor proposed that the best idea is that maybe not be completely under the city. So, it could operate in very much the way the Sister City Committee operates, with it's recognized by the city in formation and represents us, but
Not much action.
So
Yeah.
any suggestions before we move on coming from this, Dave?
There's 15 committees here. Only 5 of them only meet like a few hours a year.
Mhm.
Right.
One night a week. The Country Community, Sacred Ribbon Showers, Central Hudson Committee, Southport Water Board Budget Committee, River Road Budget Commission. Those are one night a year, pretty much. Budget Committee might be a couple, but the rest of them are like 3 or 4 hours for one night.
And some of these are mandated. I mean,
Yeah, and some of them are very active, too.
Mhm.
Yeah. But there aren't 15 committees,
Mhm.
real active committees.
Yeah.
the Parking Advisory Committee, I think, is something that comes into being when it's needed, isn't it?
Yeah, it'll be part of the parking implementation
Yeah.
process.
So we're about to move on.
Great.
And I want to talk about citizen participation, we've talked about committees. Other thoughts about, in addition to what the city is doing now, are there other citizen participation goals, activities that you'd suggest in relation to the whole sort of group of priorities that we've talked about? And if you look back to the last page with printing on it, you'll see that executive staff made a few suggestions when we did the act on this matrix, which, remember, invited each of you to make suggestions. There were several suggestions from executive staff, one from the mayor, two from Commissioner Nocita. So anything in addition to what you're doing now with regard to citizen participation, and particularly in light of the agenda that you've already set out?
I'm going to make a suggestion, if I might, and maybe we read these out. With the three citizen members that are here are actually also members of the CIC, and maybe they'd like to speak to this a bit. Is that all right?
I would like to make a comment here. Again, Paul Edgar. I think that I've always had a long-term concern about citizen involvement in improving citizen involvement within the city. But part of it's education, and I've tried to communicate a little bit with Doug and with the city manager and others about the idea of town halls. And I tried to present it to the city CIC last night about maybe being part of doing this and extending this out. We have some real misinformation taking place on a lot of different subjects. And right now, one of those happens to be urban renewal. And where I see our ability to reach out is to educate and do it in a very honest and forthright way. And when we have 400 people show up at a city commission meeting to talk about urban renewal and about plans, and many of them not knowing really what they're talking about. And I'm not trying to say that the citizens are misinformed or something, but there's a lot of implications that are very difficult for a lot of people to fully get their arms around. And therefore, I think that we really need to reach out very aggressively to bring the citizens on board with what the city is trying to do and the message they're trying to say and what they want to accomplish. And I don't know that we've won that war. And this is an opportunity.
And you're suggesting town halls is one way to do that?
Town halls is one of the ways to do it.
Jim?
Yeah, on the citizen involvement stuff, I had a couple of suggestions, but I wanted to, particularly in regards to the discussion that's taken place and culminated in last Wednesday's meeting at Pioneer Center. There are a number of people who had commented about the charter amendment provisions, mentioned that there in the past has been a citizens kind of charter review commission, and the city attorney had also sent us a memo on this charter review process. And many of the people had suggested that rather than going to a May vote this year on the three post-charter amendments we discussed, that a more detailed and involved citizen process on charter amendments take place. I think the tabling of the charter amendments on Wednesday kind of begs the question of what to do with them. And since we are already discussing a charter amendment vote for the water rate issue, I think it might be something that we should discuss to engage into a broader charter revision process over the course of this year, culminating in May 2012. I've actually gotten suggestions during this discussion on other charter amendments. One citizen suggested to me that it's high time that the municipal judge be elected rather than appointed. I don't know, there's obviously pros and cons to a suggestion like that. But I think part of the process could be an open process of, soliciting suggestions from the citizens on their concerns about the charter and how it might be amended. So as far as a citizen involvement process for this year, or a goal for increased citizen participation, I would put that on the table to start that charter review process going.
Yeah.
As a member of the CIC, just a couple observations I'd like to share. Some of the neighborhood associations have been extremely effective and their meetings have been well attended. Others are struggling. And I know that we have some budgetary issues and things in terms of funding to gather that citizen involvement that we're really striving for. And I think, I'm really impressed since David has joined us that it seems like people are saying, people are now listening to us. People are hearing us. But we're not reaching the masses. We've got over 30,000 citizens in this city, and if we look at the people who are really active, it's still a very minute percentage of the total populace. And I had a little conversation with David this morning because at last night's meeting we discovered that our neighborhood association, even though we've got 5 months yet to go in the budget year, has no money to send out even a notice about our meetings. Well, likelihood of getting anyone to a meeting without telling them where it is, even though they were given the dates, back in November and so forth, is remote. And David offered the suggestion, well, can you get email addresses for these people so that you can keep them involved and aware of what's going on? And I got thinking about that, and I thought, well, that's a tremendous idea, because how better to broadcast information than to do it by email? Now, not everyone's email proficient or even uses email, but I would like to see some thought given moving forward to how can we either, the website's wonderful, don't get me wrong, I think it's been extremely valuable to me, but you really have to be dedicated computer user to negotiate even to the second or third level of that site, and it's vastly improved over what it was 3 years ago. But there's got to be an easier way to broadcast items that are of interest to people in a better way. Thank you.
So let me ask you all, what do we do with this? Because, we can sort of brainstorm and come up with lots of good ideas. How do we move forward and really, capture some ideas that turn into real action that's effective in informing and engaging people?
I mean, I'm going to pull off my suggestion of an ombudsman because I think we went through a period where community involvement lagged in a previous period of administration time. I think that's changing. I think you've alluded to that, Tom. And I guess that you can pull my recommendation off there, and let's see how we can evolve or revolve into a more effective, having a more effective community involvement effort. I think that is occurring. You've indicated that's occurring, and you've given some specific recommendations in terms of some citizen.
I'm not sure how to accomplish it, but I think there's enough
right.
knowledge here in this room and on staff.
So I feel comfortable pulling that off at this juncture, just simply because it's really a different administration.
Sure.
I just want to say, Tom, thank you for adding that about the website. And I'm sure you guys all know this, but in the last year and a half, I mean, some of the changes that have happened are we have an economic development position. We have a dedicated IT person, which we didn't have before. I was brought into the city manager's office to help out who didn't have an admin or an assistant city manager for however many years. And so I think that we're all really trying to work together as a team to come up with these great ideas of what we can do for citizen involvement. And really are an open book to hear from all of you out in the community of what can we do, how can we do it better. And so, we've worked really closely with our IT guy to figure out what can we do on the website. Nancy's going to CIC meetings, and so we're dedicated to continue to do those things. So please just let us know and realize that, we have come a long way in a one-year period just because of some of the changes that we've tried to make. So, thanks.
I'd like to make a suggestion. We have this wonderful McLaughlin neighborhood, and it's very, very involved and has excellent communications set up, and that some of these other neighborhoods maybe take advantage of maybe an education system from McLaughlin neighborhood. Set up a session where we could share what happens in our neighborhood, and since most of the commission is in that neighborhood. Yeah.
Can I ask if maybe somebody on staff knows this, but do the neighborhood association newsletters, is there a place on our website where they can click and all the associations can see each other's stuff? There is?
I think so, yeah, as I recall. Nancy, didn't you set that up? Yeah.
I think when we talk about citizen participation too, I look at it as, and I don't mean to demean it this way because it isn't, but it's sort of like doing dishes, you're never really done.
Yeah.
Every day you have to do it if you want a healthy government. And so to me, I know it's on our goals for the year, but it was probably always, when would that not be on your goals? You know what I mean? It's always going to be, did we do enough? Did we do enough? I think it's kind of neat to have it on your goals because it reminds us that we can never really overdo it. Arguably, at our last big meeting, we might overdid it. But
no,
we really are striving for that. So ideas, the more we get, the better.
Betty?
Social media, Facebook, Twitter, whatever. I'm not into that. Are we doing all that?
Yes.
I said it right, didn't I? Twitter?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
We updated our technology policy for our staff, and we wrote that in the last 10 months that I've been here. We changed that. We do have some of our departments that have active Facebook pages, but we don't have a citywide one right now because we're afraid to create the thing that we can't maintain it.
No,
we're afraid that we won't be able to keep it going.
We do.
Isn't that?
It is up and running.
It is? Our citywide one is?
Yes.
Oh.
It's not used
Wow.
very much at this point in time.
That must have just happened.
And then do you send out tweets or whatever that is?
We don't have any friends.
We have 53 friends.
So,
Okay.
So
we're getting there.
But the social media thing is really,
we need more friends. The social media is a new thing that has been put up in the last couple of months.
Yeah.
We've had RSS feeds on our website for a long time, and we try to get that information out through the CIC and to our neighborhood associations that, sign up for RSS feeds and you'll get immediate news and immediate calendar events and be tapped in. And again, as Tom says, it's very computer driven, but we're getting there.
Yeah.
So William and Tom both have their hands up. In a minute, I'm going to ask if there's an action item here. And I want to say that the idea of charter review is different from these.
Yes,
and I want to come back to that and see if there's thoughts about it. And again, the question of resources, capacity comes up.
I would contend that if our city manager, our esteemed city manager, is not aware of the neighborhood newsletters being available online, then the CIC has more work to do insofar as marketing that concept. I have set up the Facebook pages for the McLaughlin Neighborhood Association, for the Hillendale Neighborhood Association, and have helped set up the Facebook page for the Berkeley Hills Association. And I think that I'm just going to extend the offer to the other neighborhood associations to set Facebook pages up for them because I know they can be successful.
Go ahead. You can have a chance to respond.
You know what? I'm like any other staff member up here. I just struggle to keep up.
Yeah.
And sometimes you
That's
just
right.
don't see it.
You just
I
call
didn't
them
even know
Twitters
we
and
had our
go
page
on.
active. I knew that Nancy was working on it,
There
but I
you
didn't
go.
know until tonight. So.
I think Terry partly addressed the comment that I was about to make, and that was as the conversation was going on, the thought occurred to me that I personally would never have a Twitter account or a Facebook account or anything like that. I'm just not into social networking. However, I realized the usefulness of it, and the thought occurred to me that if we had a specific place on our website that allowed an individual to, say, register for information about the library, information about arts, information about heritage, information about a specific neighborhood group. Then an individual could have a group of people that they broadcast just that kind of information to. Nancy?
We do, and it's called an RSS feed. So if you go to that particular page and you find something, in fact, on the home page, it's available from right there. You just click on the RSS feeds and you can subscribe to any page you want.
I know of that technology.
Okay.
And I've been trying to use it for about 5 years now, and I still haven't figured out how to use it. So
Yes.
it's
Find
worth
a friend
it.
and that
Just
knows
please
and
be
sit down
patient
and
with us. We're getting there.
So I want to elevate to a bigger picture here.
Yes.
And the question is there an action item here? As David said, and I can, tell you, having worked with many cities and counties, if this isn't on your goal list, something's wrong.
Yes.
Everybody can do better all the time. And I'd also encourage you to check in with other cities and see what they've done, because there have been some interesting ideas that sometimes actually work. Is there an action item here?
Well, the 3 items that we have here are things that are ongoing, and I think those are important. I'm not sure, the last 2 seem to be extremely detailed in nature. I don't understand them, but that's all right. That doesn't mean anything.
Well, we're not going to go through every single item. The question is there an item here, and I'm not hearing other than,
Continue the good work.
Continue to move forward.
But I do want to ask this question about charter review, because that's a significant question, and Jim's raised, and I want to make sure that people have a chance to.
There's a couple of components. One, this review committee that was talked about. I want to say what it was intended to do was a review of the whole charter, existing charter. Some of it is just horrendously long, where it mentions all the existing parks at the time the charter was made. And actually, we can't do away with a park if it's created by ordinance, and so you don't have to have all those things in there. So there are things in the existing charter that could be simplified versus new items coming into the charter. And I think these can happen in parallel, but I don't think they can be combined.
No.
How do we clean up the existing wording in the existing charter? And then how do we add additional amendments? And so I think somehow we got to keep those 2 things distinct. The Charter Committee was intended to look at the existing charter and see how they cleaned it up.
We're talking about when you form a committee that are the scope
Absolutely.
clearly defined.
I don't disagree with what Doug's just said, but I guess the question I would pose is, if you do them in parallel, is it a priority of this commission, since we're in the goal setting, to do that, to do both of those, a charter review process and a charter amendment process?
I would say on the charter amendments, you'll be looking for a majority of committee of the council to support the charter amendments.
No.
Betty?
It's not at this time. We've got enough to work on. We've got to do arts and heritage and natural resources at this time.
I'd like a show of hands. Who supports a charter review process and a charter amendment process?
Well, I know that.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
There's a lot of ways.
I'm raising.
For both.
I'm raising.
So
I'm posing it as, for this straw poll, I'm posing it as both.
So what you're saying, so I'm gonna phrase this in a way that I understand it. Push back if this is wrong. Establish some sort of charter review group, commission, task force that would require staffing, would require resources, and that would both clean up the existing charter and also consider amendments to the charter.
Yes, I agree to that. That doesn't mean I agree to specific amendments. That's
Right.
No, exactly.
Yeah. No, I think that's fine.
Every one of those amendments would come to the commission, and every one that was forwarded by the commission would go to the voters.
Right.
And that's what
Well,
charter.
that would be a question of whether it would be the commission would forward to the city commission. The Charter Review Commission would forward to the city commission, and the city
that's
commission
correct.
would make the determination of what to do.
So, yes.
Just to clarify, I heard somebody tie the water rate rollback discussion with that charter review, and I'm a little concerned about that, because I'm concerned about it could get really complicated amongst all the big charter, looking at the whole charter, and if there's these contentious charter amendments.
If they're
and
voting all on the
Yeah.
same thing at the same time.
Yeah.
That can be solved.
And so I would prefer, and it's almost different stakeholders. I don't know. I'm concerned about it.
Well, my response to that would be is that, and I think Doug, you actually mentioned that in an earlier setting that, for example, for those, I think what you had referred to is that those charter amendments that had been approved by voters in the past, if they were to be repealed or changed, then they should probably be considered separately.
Yes.
I mean, you could have a May 2012 vote with, 4 or 5 charter amendments on it, and people could choose which ones they agree with and which they don't agree with. It doesn't have to be an all or nothing thing. I mean, you could frame a referral like that any way you want to. I mean,
Is there a time frame, though? Because I can understand Nancy's concern about putting it all together on the same kind of ballot.
Yeah.
So is it important that it go forward at a certain time?
Well, I think that the potential timeline has been set out by the city attorney in his memorandum on the
Water rate bowl. Yeah, which is separate from what I was talking about. And then with all of the charter changes, is there going to be a specific time that has to be put on the ballot? And what is the cost to put that specific stuff on the ballot? Is there a free election that we could put all the charter amendment changes on the ballot so we could do it for free?
I think that's going to be driven by how the committee moves.
Right, but we'll ultimately have to decide which election to put them on for.
David?
Well, I have a similar concern with Nancy, and I'm not saying that Commissioner Nocita, he raised the point these could be handled separately. I think Doug said that, somebody else. I think they can be, and I really think that they should be, because that's a problem if we don't solve, we're kind of dead in the water. That has to get fixed some way. The other thing to keep in mind, and I don't know how many commissioners in here have been involved in election issues, other than their own election. I mean, I'm talking about ballot measures. But we only have 5 of you. And sometimes if you're trying to call and get something done, that's a good thing. But if you're trying to educate large numbers of people in your community and get support to pass this bond measure, which is staff, we cannot go out and advocate for this, but you can. And because there's only 5 of you, it's going to be your baby to kind of go out there and sell it to your constituents and get support in the community and answer questions. And so the staff, we can help you with a lot of the factual information, but it is a lot of, I want to say, community energy that sort of gets sucked out of the organization. Yeah, I think that any charter amendment is going to have that impact. And so you probably do want to be real cautious and try to separate out that one. Also, there's a lot of legal review involved in this, and at least with the water one, we have an identified funding source to pay for that cost of the legal review. So you want to probably just make sure you separate that one out. And depending on how comprehensive the charter review that remains, the other parts of it, many cities will take they'll take a couple of years to actually get through the process.
That's what
So I don't want you to feel like you ran out of time. I think we've learned a hard lesson here recently about when we're trying to push for a rapid change to the charter, sometimes it just blows up in our face. And maybe if you give yourself enough time so you're not up against an election date with the bigger charter review, that would be a wiser approach, I think.
Thank you.
Doug?
That was good clarification.
The charter review, and I'm talking about the review of the existing charter, some work had already been done on it with a previous commission. Ed Sullivan's got all the notes on that. So we're not quite starting at square one on that process. We can we can have a meeting with our attorney and talk about what had been done up to that particular point.
So I have a suggestion here. I think that like arts and heritage, that somebody needs to sort of frame exactly what this is going to require in terms of timing, in terms of charge, in terms of resources. Don't know who that is, and it's probably not Rocky. It sounds like Jim is one of the people that needs to do that, and leading to a work session.
I think last year I might have said something similar when I volunteered Rocky for something, and then Bill Kabizman immediately leaned over and said something to the effect that no good deed goes unpunished.
But it's it's sounding. It seems like sort of in the spirit of what we did before that either Doug or Kathy might want to offer to join Jim, and that we need at least one staff member to work on this with them.
On the overall charter?
On the whole, this whole group of things that all, I think, need to be coordinated with one another. That is...
Well, obviously, I'm going to be involved in the water.
The water, the cleanup, and the sort of proactive charter amendment process.
Well, there must be something on this list we can take off.
Well, so that's the question. We now, this list has grown, and I think that staff is going to have to take a pretty serious look at it and see whether this is within the capacity. Now, one of the things we talked about is 1 year is an arbitrary limit.
Yep.
Maybe some of these things can be spread over the course of 2 years. We started, the very first thing that we talked about a week ago Saturday was, let's think about 2 years, because this council is going to be together for 2 years. So maybe the thing to do now, and there is one more thing. We've got another 24 or 25 items on here, and I want to know whether anyone believes that any of those rise to the level of sort of these priorities that we've been talking about. Clearly, we need to take a look at what we've already done and how that fits over time, how that fits in terms of resources. But I do want to ask, is there anything else on here? And, you know, they're all labeled by names. A lot of them were suggested by Jim, but a number by others. Are there any of these that rise to the level of the priorities that we've talked about?
Before we close the discussion on the charter, it just occurred to me of another potential resource, because I am concerned about not only a staff person joining you guys, but also the legal review that would be required depending on where the charter stuff goes. What we might be able to do is, if the two of you come up with sort of a list or some general principles that you want addressed in the charter review by this committee, then I could contact LOC and see if they have any. I know they have a model charter, but I think for us adopting that, because we have all these things with our parks and all these other, we have some weird stuff in there that got actually added on through amendments more than anything. How do we deal with those? I think this is why the legal costs are going to be higher than we expect, because we've got to find a way to deal with those. If it was as simple as just adopting the model charter, canning the other one, that would be a whole different matter. I guess we could put that on the ballot and see if it would work. But it could be a really sticky wicket trying to untie that.
When I look at the charter review of the existing charter, it's a simplifying language. I don't think if you're indicating, no, you haven't changed what the charter specifically deals with. You've just simplified the language. There's actually language in the current charter that says if the city should ever procure a certain piece of property, which it's never done, it becomes a park. Yeah. Now, why that's in there, I don't know, because the opportunity came to procure it and the city didn't even bother with it.
So we've talked about 3 different elements of charter. One is the water rate measure, and that's very specific, has a timeline and a process. The second is a housekeeping of the current charter, and the third is proactive amendment of the charter. the one thing I want to say from my experience, and I think some of you know that I was on the Charter Commission in Portland. We worked for a year and a half, and the worst thing that happened in that process was that we got out of touch with City Council. And whatever you do, you need to work very closely with your Charter Commission and make sure that, it's one of these things where a advisory commission that's worked very hard can come to you and say, here's our recommendation, and if you're on a collision course unless you've worked with them throughout. So I think what we've talked about is a process where Kathy, Jim, sounds, David, like you're the point person on this, will work together to sort out what that looks like. And again, then this whole work plan needs to be probably sequenced over at least 2011, some of 2012, resources attached, and see whether the wagon's full. And before we're done, which would be nice if it were soon, I don't want to ignore the fact that people put a lot of energy into their suggestions here. Is there anything else on this list that rises to the level of maybe bumping something else?
I think there's a lot on the list.
Yeah. Jim,
Go ahead, Ken.
Oh, good.
I've got one, I think it's very important to have some surgery to do that for the organization.
They've got a land use application in now, and we've been in touch with them several times, and they don't seem to be very
not
interested. So, it depends on how much you want to do there, Commissioner Roth, but they really haven't. They do have one change they're making now. And Dan, you could probably speak to that more than me.
Blue heron might be more, there might be more opportunities than blue heron site.
Joe, if you don't mind, I need to make a suggestion. The suggested priorities not yet addressed are substantial. There are many of them. Each one of them requires some explanation and discussion. It's 9 o'clock right now. We've got another agenda item to talk about tonight. I don't think it's reasonable to try to wrap up this discussion on all of these suggested priorities tonight. I just don't think that's reasonable. I don't think it's fair to the people who suggested them. And I would propose continuing this discussion either to a special work session or to the March work session. But it's not reasonable to expect that we can get through this list tonight.
Doug?
I agree. I guess I prefer more than a month's digestion. I mean, some of these are going to come to the floor. Maybe, as opposed to March, maybe April.
No, I think April's too late. Just because, by then you're getting into budget season, where you have to start, assign.
Budget season now.
Well, that's why I think sooner than later. I would propose either a special meeting after the second commission meeting in February or the regular work session in March.
So it's sounding like if we do that, and their heads nodding, that what we do is sort of what we did tonight. That is that we start out with this kind of what's the work plan look like now, except with timelines to make it clear how this timed out over the next year or so.
And I think doing that and bringing that to the next discussion will really help us work through this list. Having sifted and gotten some clarity on what we've discussed tonight.
Okay. So, commissioners, is that okay? He's nodding.
So, when are you guys thinking about doing this next work session?
We were talking with Joe earlier about March 8th, but that happens to be the LOC training that we've already moved from January, so.
I was just talking to Nancy, and we are pretty much booked all through March. However, I hate to even say this, but February 16th, we have a fairly light agenda, although you do have a Urban Renewal Commission meeting before that. So we have the 16th The only downside to that is I won't be here. Maybe nobody will miss me, but I won't be here.
We'll assign everything to you.
Yeah, that's a big fear.
Wait until, or to Terry.
I mean, I won't. That's right.
You can help them figure out
And
how
what,
to do the
the
technology.
other thing that's a worry to me is if we get into March, if something comes out of those discussions that we're supposed to budget for, I don't know if we can do it.
I'm
So-
uncomfortable talking about goals and objectives without the city manager present.
I agree.
And so my suggestion would be a special work session a week after, which would be what, February 23rd? Or the Tuesday after the next city commission
You'll be
meeting?
back then?
I think we have
Maybe the
some-
22nd, maybe?
We have some
Get back
evening
the
things
21st, I think.
booked that week.
When is this room open, Nancy? Okay.
I wish it was on my calendar. with me.
Are you available?
David, I think you have some evening things already scheduled.
What?
Whoa.
21st is
The 22nd,
21st is on.
the 22nd and 23rd appears to be open.
Pardon me?
22nd and 23rd.
Days of the week or no?
22nd is a Tuesday. I'm open then.
Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday.
The
It looks
difficulty
like
with
two.
Wednesday is usually
I
an
can't do
impact meeting.
Wednesday. You may not miss me.
Well, I may not be able to make it. Well, I could make it.
I
but-
can't do Thursday either. You may not miss me.
Tuesday, the
I could do the
22nd.
22nd.
That's okay with me, too.
This the 23rd and 24th, which is Wednesday, Thursday of that week.
Sounds like Tuesday, the 22nd.
That's the day I can do. No, not
You're here?
I'm here.
The Historic Review Board
You
has
should be refreshed.
has a meeting in for that night.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
The 21st?
Right. Yeah, that's,
Isn't there
that's the president.
Isn't there an HRB meeting on the 22nd? Because I'm supposed to be
Historic
at that
Review
meeting
Board.
for.
Nancy,
That's
we
not-
can't hear you all the way there.
The
No,
HRB
I-
hearing's not on the calendar?
It's not on the calendar, but he just told me that that's that night, so.
Yeah, it is.
It is that night.
Thanks,
Unless you want to relocate.
Who besides Christina is signed up?
What's that?
What?
Yeah. You and I.
Huh? We could go to another room.
About
Pioneer Center.
March 2.
So,
Favorite place?
are we agreed on the 22nd?
Well, I don't know, but where?
We don't know.
We can work that one out. I mean, they'll find a place. Somebody will find a place for the 22nd. No.
If I might, Mayor, we might be able to streamline one more thing and get this off the list tonight about ensuring that we talk to businesses before we close down their access to their, on the projects for the downtown. We're going to do that anyway. I think you want to make sure we were, but we're going to be doing that anyway. So if you want, you can trust me on that and take this off the list. Right, Nancy? Yeah. Absolutely. But that's up to you, but that would be one less thing on this list. Yeah.
So,
Well,
but,
no, we've already.
but as Jim said, let's give it all their due,
Okay.
and those we can talk about
And you
next
can
time.
cross it off next time.
Okay. I'll put a question mark by it.
So I think we're done for tonight.
You're done for
I'm
tonight.
done. We're done with
You're-
this for
you're-
tonight.
Okay.
You're done for tonight.
We're done with this for tonight. Any last thoughts, observations, comments about goals for tonight? Okay.
May I offer another option for your next goal setting would be on the 2nd of March at the regular meeting? It's just another option rather than scheduling another evening. Moving a meeting is such a difficult thing,
Okay,
if there's any way to avoid it.
let's keep the two alternatives open now.
Those two, the 22nd and the 2nd?
Oh, I see what you're saying. So we could do
So can we meet before?
Well, you guys already have that on your calendars,
Yeah.
the city commission, and I know everyone else here does, so
That's fine.
how about March 2nd instead?
Yeah, March 2nd is fine.
Mayor, does that work okay for you? Does it work okay for you? Yes. You just keep throwing these dates out.
Yeah, second's fine.
Question is, do we want to recess before going into C? Do you think C's going to take that much time? Do you want to continue on?
I'm fine with that.
No recess?
No recess for tonight?
Right now?
Right now.
It's just to take a break.
Oh, no.
So I just want to be
Okay.
clear.
No,
Are we
just-
going to meet then on the 2nd, before the
So
commission meeting?
the last chapter of goal setting is March 2nd, is that right?
Is that before the meeting or after the meeting?
I would say
It's at
during the
the
meeting, as an agenda item on the March 2nd meeting. And we can adjust our agenda for any heavier items. We could work that out for
Can
another
we meet
date.
in this format?
Can we have an earlier format, though?
If there's an Urban Renewal Commission meeting that evening, then we would have to hold that in advance of this meeting.
Okay.
Okay.
Just plan on being at City Hall forever on the 2nd.
And it sounds like
Okay,
we
that's our
effectively have
regular
moved
day.
right into C, agenda item scheduling discussion.
Okay.
Well, wait, I have one agenda item for you. Remember that the last thing that we did when the Glazers were here was that long list of what you can do to work together as effectively as possible. Roles and responsibilities was a major part of that, and that'll be covered, I'm sure, by the League of Oregon Cities. But there's certainly a discussion to follow on that and lots of other ideas. So, don't let that one go. That's a future agenda item, but not a business meeting agenda. It's something for you all to do at some point.
Let me ask on this particular agenda, we're talking about scheduling discussions for the city commission meeting. Is that what we're talking about? On C?
Goal setting? Yes.
No, for C.
For C.
For tonight.
Agenda items.
How do we schedule an agenda? Is that what we're talking about?
Isn't that?
I think
Yeah.
the city manager listed this item to have a discussion about how the agenda it gets set in general. I can give some background on it and I'll allow the city manager to follow up. I had expressed a little bit of discomfort recently when the city manager invited me in to meet with him and the mayor about setting an agenda item or an agenda. I think it was for the retreat, David? It was for the retreat itself.
I don't remember. I know your first concern about this was when I was putting the retreat together and lined up various consultants, and I think you were concerned that I didn't.
Yeah. Well, that's to me not really exclusively an agenda
Oh, you're
item.
talking about our
scheduling
actual
discussion.
agenda.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I had also expressed concern about
Yeah.
how the agenda gets set.
Yeah.
In that, when we had been discussing meeting with Joe and setting the agenda for the retreat, the city manager had asked me to meet with him and the mayor and with Joe to set the agenda for the retreat. And I really felt uncomfortable not doing that with the whole commission. And I expressed to David that part of my kind of reflexive concern about that was that in my first 2 years of commission, a lot of stuff I felt had been done,
That way.
including setting the agenda by the former mayor and the former city manager, and then kind of imposed upon the rest of us, and that by doing that I would kind of be assuming that same kind of role I was concerned about in my first 2 years, and I wanted it to be a more open process where everybody could, be involved. One of David's ideas was kind of have that kind of agenda setting role be rotated. by all the commissioners, so everybody could have, that kind of participation generally. So that was the concern I had. I think the other matter, and we talked about with the Glazers, is a more involved discussion about roles and responsibilities that's really not on the agenda, and I didn't see it on the agenda, so I'm not as prepared to talk about it tonight.
Okay.
But I do want to just have a general discussion about how the agenda gets set, and the new commission rules, I think, put the whole responsibility on the mayor and the manager.
Well, maybe I could just review kind of.
Sure.
I think that's a good introduction. Let me say that I think the way you were setting your agenda here, the commission, you know that at every meeting people say future agenda items.
Mm-hmm.
And when you say that, you have a chance right there to be directly involved without the mayor or the manager. And then the city recorder, she keeps a running list of every time, believe it or not, every time you guys say something like that, it ends up on a sheet that she never lets us forget, even as much as the ombudsman is still on there. Maybe tonight it'll actually finally not be, but that thing has lived 9 lives already. I mean, it may have been there before I got here. So we do that, so there's that kind of input. I just want to review what you're doing now, because it's actually, it seems like it's pretty comprehensive, but there may be times when you want to tweak it. So that's happening, and then what we do as staff, and under the charter, it's the manager's responsibility to bring forward items of interest to the community that, in my judgment, have to be on there. I also am getting input from you at every meeting, what you want, and then we have our goal setting, and so there's a lot of kind of active involvement from the commission and leading that agenda. There are times when things come up that I know about or the staff knows about, like a grant application we want to submit that needs your approval that we didn't know we were going to have the opportunity. So we'll bring that. For example, that's a new thing that you might not know about, and suddenly there it is. So there needs to be that kind of discretion for us staff to put things on there that we see coming. So we're doing that right now. And then in the past, I believe, and please, somebody who was here longer than me, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that the city manager, after that kind of input, then sent out the agenda. And so we review that internally in our staff meetings every week. We have an agenda review to make sure that the manager gets all the input he or she needs from all the staff. And so then the manager would publish an agenda, a recommended agenda that would bring to you each week. So what I proposed that we start doing is add the mayor to that agenda review list. And the mayor will typically be having conversations with some of the commissioners that maybe I'm not aware of necessarily, just interaction. And then the reason I suggested, Jim, that the council president, your new position as council president, I suggested that as an idea to give the commission yet one more place to have input. And the way this works in some cities is, some cities just have the manager do it. Some cities have the manager and the mayor do it. Some cities have the manager and the mayor go to the commission and have a commission meeting to decide your meeting. I mean, that's kind of silly, but they go that far. And then some, one city I knew of in particular said, well, the mayor and the manager and the council president meet every 2 weeks to review. We called it the agenda review lunch. And we would actually get together and have a lunch, and people would look at the agenda, and there were head nods. And in that situation, Jim, the council president had sort of the obligation to check with the other members and stay in the loop. So, for example, if Kathy would have brought something to you and said, we are really missing the boat on XYZ project. I see lots of problems there. I want to have an update. And she would then say that to you, and then you would remind us of that at agenda review, and we'd put it on there. That's a little cumbersome because it puts a lot of pressure on the council president, who usually has another job or two that they're doing. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend that. I would just describing these are some of the parameters about how you can set your agenda. And unless you feel like the process is broken right now, you probably don't have to change it. But every once in a while there's going to be something that slips through the cracks, and I think I've said this before, where you may wish you had a different process, but you can actually make the process worse if you get it too cumbersome. So those are just some of my thoughts about how you set, there's no right or wrong way to set your agenda. Yeah.
I know there's items that have been brought up that haven't come on the agenda yet, and I think frankly, we knew the last two meetings we're going to have were going to be long ones. And that's one of the reasons that happened. In fact, that is the reason that happened. But I'll just give you for example, you've talked about having commissioner representation on the bargaining thing. That will come up. I would prefer it not come up at a meeting where the city manager is not present. But maybe the next commission meeting after that, we could put that on the agenda. But I mean, that's one that's there, and we know it's there. But I think we also knew that we were in for a couple of long nights in our last two commission meetings, and turned out we were correct. So but that's one item that is there, and that will come up. My preference is not come up the next commission meeting, because I do think we ought to have our city manager there to talk about it too. Is there another item that, in fact, is
I just have a comment. What the city manager just said is summarized in 3 sentences in the rules of. I didn't mean that.
Probably 20 seconds.
Sure could have got a lot shorter, couldn't you?
40 seconds. C- today.
Oh, brother. Okay, so
these guys are never going to.
The rules of procedure. There was someone who thought all that through and succinctly put it into 3 sentences. And let me just read them quickly, because these are on your agenda to be on the consent agenda next week. The agenda shall be prepared by the city manager in consultation with the mayor. That's the agenda review. The agenda shall be a listing of topic subjects to be considered by the commission at any meeting. Items are placed on the agenda by consensus of the majority of the commission or recommended by the city manager. That's what we did tonight under future agenda items. The mayor may change the order of the business or add or delete items on the agenda under adoption of the agenda during a meeting. So everything that the city manager just said is in your rules of order. If you want to change that, you have the freedom to do that at the next meeting. Otherwise, they'll be approved as that.
I think we can make it work.
Yep.
The way it is, but that's your.
You can always change your rules of procedure.
And if you think we've lost something, be sure to tell us about it. Yeah. I wanted to get that one point out there, because I know that's one thing that I heard the majority of the commission said they wanted on the agenda item. It's going to come up. It's just that.
And something that's not in the rules, I mean, seriously, if any one of the commissioners ever said, hey, I'd just like to be on agenda review with the mayor and you one morning, come on up. Sure. Join us, because we're.
I'm waiting for this. I'm waiting for this lunch you were talking about. That hasn't happened. That was a cumbersome one.
Yeah, it is. I think you've got a pretty good system here.
So is there anything else? I mean, does this kind of summarize where we are? And if it, like I say, if something has fallen off our radar, please bring it back up again. Yeah. But that's the one thing that I was thinking of that might be brought up, and the reasons why it's been postponed. And again, I would prefer not to see it on an agenda where our city manager wasn't present. So I would say we would see that in our first meeting in April. March. I'm on the wrong month. Yeah. March, yes. So is there anything else on that, C?
No.
City manager report.
I want to remind you folks that Scott Archer has the pleasure of doing a tree removal at the Carnegie tomorrow, and you guys have heard about that a few months back. We've been talking about it for a while, and I just wanted you to be aware of it in case you get a phone call. We're doing that tomorrow. Is it tomorrow that it's happening, or later this week?
Yeah, I think it's later in the week. Is
he going to be gone when it happens?
I hope so.
So I'm going to come on you, Scott.
David, we were going to mention about the visitor center item.
Go ahead.
We had talked about this earlier. I've got this cold bug creeping up on me, worse by the moment here, so excuse me. I think I think, Rocky, you had brought up that you wanted to discuss the issue about the contract with the visitor center down at the end of the trail site. And we wanted to let you know that staff, Terry and I and David is involved as well, are in the process of setting up some meetings with the county's tourism director, and also I think with the county administrator at some point, getting involved in some of these discussions to discuss this contract situation. So there have been some staff scheduling conflicts because of some vacations on the county's end of things, and so we're not able to meet until after, I think after next week or something. Yeah, so we weren't able to garner any information to really have anything to discuss at the current time. So we'll be bringing that back in some type of report or some follow-up, I guess, at some point. We just wanted to let you know that we're working on that discussion, and there will be something to report as soon as we have those meetings happen, or the meeting or meetings happen.
In addition to that question has got several pieces to it. There's the contract with the contract for the visitor center itself. Also, whatever contract we have with CHP from the city too. These were all kind of topics that we discussed when the interpretive center closed, and kind of the future. So there's several components to that. The other, don't know if, well, I guess I'll talk to you about another question separately. But so it's to me kind of a broad discussion of where we go in the future. Does CHP stay the kind of middle group in terms of taking the funds from the county to run the visitor center, and that money's been going basically through CHP as an entity, so that we don't take on staff, et cetera, and all that. So that's been discussed as a possibility of, does CHP stay there as that group? Is it another group that comes in? All of that.
And I think that really speaks to the larger issue that we were trying to get to at the retreat, is what direction do you want to go? Do you want to hire a nonprofit organization to continue to run that, as well as some kind of program? And I think we might need to have some of those discussions before we get in with the county, so we kind of have a better idea.
Also, I just want to clarify something while
because
we're on
the county doesn't want to make a decision on it, I can guarantee you,
Right.
and neither does CHP.
Right.
And that's why we were still sitting here, after the summer, because they wanted to keep control of it over the summer and just kind of let it finish out. Well, I don't want to start the next summer without some real clear plan of what the future brings, because everyone's just kind of sitting there and in limbo, and we don't really know what the long term of that is going to be. And there's a lot of questions about the building and all those things, that have to be addressed too. But I just want to have a better handle on are we comfortable as a city leaving CHP in that position, which I don't know if we are. I still have concerns about that. If they are staying there, then maybe that's fine. But that discussion, I think, should happen even maybe. I was more envisioning kind of a topic on a work session to at least discuss some of the concerns and issues about those things before it even got to that level. I know some of those discussions have happened. I was in a meeting, a year ago when we first talked about how the visitor center would stay open through the summer. We all kind of agreed that, right now CHP was the only option to keep that visitor center open. But now summer's over and we're getting through into the new year. I want to make sure we talk about that before the next summer comes.
Yeah. I think we're working on.
Isn't this a thing that you just took with Betty? I can't remember who else was involved in terms of the heritage piece.
Oh, well, it's sort of a component of it,
Yeah,
I guess,
so I
but
think-
not necessarily.
No, I was thinking, though, maybe that dialogue you
Okay.
and Betty, and
Okay.
were you on that piece, the Heritage piece, or you
Me.
were on the other one?
Terry.
You were on the Arch.
I did want to, if I could just, because this is out there,
Yeah.
I just want to clarify one thing, and I know we don't need to get bogged down in the details of this discussion right now, but the city does not have a contract with CHP. The county does. We have a contract. It's a three-way contract. It's a little confusing. We went through this before, but we've actually got 2 new commission members now, even since then. But even then, it was a little confusing. The city has a contract that lets the county run the visitor center. The county is contracting with CHP. Granted, it's our property. We have the right to control that. So I don't want to start a.
So we don't have any sort of do we have, and you know, as much as I know about this topic, I still don't know.
Right.
So do we have a contract, I mean, in terms of who's using the building, there's got to be something in writing for that. And that's with the county,
Right.
not with CHP, right?
Yeah, I think all the questions you're asking probably validate why we need to have some further discussion on this, because we contract with Clackamas County,
Right.
and that gives them the right to subcontract with some type of operator of the center. I think what you're getting at, Commissioner, is that the city has to maintain some control over who's running the center or who's in there or whatever. And we do have that control. So I think the bigger point of the question is not to get into the semantics of the contracting, because ultimately it's the city's property, is that the commission, we need to know as staff what you're comfortable with being there or not. That's the big picture. So I think we could get kind of bogged down in how the contract works. I could explain it again, but it'd take me another 10 minutes, so probably don't want to do that tonight.
Well, I mean, I only brought that up because that's the only way I see of dealing with it, but it needs to be a discussion. There's several individual issues, too, I want to ask about.
You bet.
Couple of things. I don't want to drag this on either, but my recollection is, number one, we went to the vote of the people to have the visitor center there on city property. The TDC provides the money for the operation, so they have the contract with whoever is running it.
That's correct.
And we've got the agreement with them.
That's
because
correct.
it's on city property.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yep.
What complicated a couple of things, though, is that the TDC had a changeover
Right.
right at the time when we were having our changeover. And so there was a question of who was responsible for hiring the contractor and overseeing the contractor. And that's how we ended up in the situation
I
now.
gone down to a couple of the programs they've had down there, and they're pretty good. A couple of evening programs that they had, and they're pretty good.
So we'll bring that back at a future work session, then, definitely.
That's all I have. Staff?
Let's get the heck out of here.
Uh-oh. Too late.
Nancy.
It's coming
Okay, I'll reopen it.
These things are coming fast. I had a tree item too, and we have for the Main Street Circulation Project. In replacing a couple of the curb extensions, we have to take out some of the little street trees at the corners, and there's also a tree there's an island at 6th and Main that is coming out, and there's a tree in there that has to be removed. Then there's also another tree that obstructs the traffic signal that ODOT's requiring us to remove. So there will be 5 trees coming out, and we're working with planning to get their street trees. We're working with planning to get our permit and arrange for all the mitigation. And we'll be putting trees back in on Main Street, but we'll have to put some trees elsewhere too because they're bigger than 2-inch caliper or whatever.
So since you did that, it gets frustrating seeing trees come out and trees go in and starting over. ODOT is a bigger problem with that than any place else where I've seen them taking out all the vegetation they've got at one spot and then revegetating it and then starting all over. I realize changes occur, but on some of these things, oftentimes it seems to me we're bringing a very, very small caliper tree that's going to take a long time to get to a point that we'd like to see it. I think some of those trees that are planted at the Carnegie Center is a good example. They're really small caliber trees when we remove some nice big maples and elms in there. And I think even though it has additional expense, we don't want to start and wait for that many years before we really have the canopy. I'm afraid we're on a roast there when we're watching the concerts in the park if some of those trees go out.
For the street trees, our projects, we usually require 3-inch caliper to start with, which is pretty good size. So sometimes when they get knocked down by drugs.
I'm doing this so it doesn't appear that I'm picking on Parks and Recreation. So you brought it up, and I'm just talking to you at the moment.
Nancy, you can defend our tree cutting, too.
I just wanted the commission to be aware of it, because, whenever there's a tree that comes down in the city, there's...
I didn't want to make this look like an attack on Parks and Recreation. You brought up the topic, so I could direct it to you.
Before we go now. Thanks, everybody.
May I?
Yes.
Goodbye.